If the truth is on your side, why lie? The Hawaiian people were screwed over. Annexation shouldn't have happened. It's just a fact, right? So then why lie about like, oh, the missionaries forced our Christianity on us, and why lie about that when the truth is fine?
Yeah.
Nobody called it the Bayonet Constitution until decades afterwards, and today we call it the Bayonet Constitution, and there's this whole mythos that came up around it where the king was forced to sign this at gunpoint, at the point of a bayonet, and that's why it's called the Bayonet. And that's not true. That didn't happen at all.
Sure.
But still today, it's the Bayonet Constitution.
And it dilutes the impact of the word, right? Racist was used so aggressively to the point that like a lot of Republicans are like, yeah, I am racist, because it doesn't mean anything now, right? Which is the worst outcome. Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Bridges. Today we are joined by Knowing Better, a history YouTuber. You are one of my favorite channels that I found. Oh. I have been binging your content. Specifically, one of my favorite parts about your content is the creativity with how you tell the history story, the different scenes that you pull in, even like the little subtle details, like when you had the Kellogg's episode, you had like cornflakes in the background and you like design your set to reflect the theme of like what you're talking about. And then you also did some crazy stuff where you had like a TV at one point and you were like talking within the TV.
Still do. Yep.
Yeah. You do like a lot of really creative stuff. Do you have like a big production team, or is it just you?
It's just me. I do all the research, writing, filming, and editing. I have some assistants that help me find, research assistants that help me find images or sources, that kind of stuff that I don't have access to because I'm not an academic anymore. But for the most part, it's all me. Yeah, it's...
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. How much time? So if an episode is if a video that you put out is an hour and a half on a topic, how much time do you think you spend making that video?
Probably over 500 hours. Every video seems to get longer and longer for me. It used to be every 2 weeks, then every month. Now I'm doing every 3 or 4, sometimes 5 months. So it does take 500-600 hours to make a video.
Yeah. Fair.
It's a pretty brave name. Knowing Better.
Oh. Well,
it assumes a lot of correctness on your part, but
well, it was a play on the G.I. Joe thing of now you know and knowing is half the battle, that thing. Okay. And I was like, well, I'm not explaining the entirety. You won't know everything, but you will know better.
Okay. Okay, gotcha.
Interesting.
When you go to select topics for videos and everything, what is your process for deciding you're going to choose a video? And then how often does that come to fruition? Do you ever choose a topic and then you get 30 minutes in and you're like, this is dumb, or a few weeks in? Sorry, normally we don't have the windows open.
I'm also sitting here
yeah, no, you're good. Normally the windows aren't open, but the apartment unit is working on the AC for a few days, so that's okay.
And they take them out for their
they'll be done in 5 minutes. They get tired. Anyway.
It's very cute if you want to watch.
Yeah, so how do you pick topics? When you pick one, do you usually stick with it all the way through, or yeah?
Well, I do have a list, as many YouTubers do, but I haven't really consulted it in a long time because the videos just sort of come to me naturally now. They just sort of feed off of each other. So I've been doing a religion series. So I did Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Seventh-day Adventists. That order was already in my head. Mm-hmm. When it comes to other topics, say my next one on Hawaii, that was just sort of a natural, okay, I saw someone's tiny desk performance, and at the end of it, she lists off a bunch of places: free Palestine, free, God, I want to say she said Sudan, but I don't remember. Anyway, free Guam, free Hawaii, and all that. And a lot of people were like, wait, free Hawaii? I'm like, that's my next video.
Gotcha.
Right? So
for free Sudan, it was probably, what's the name of the place to the east of it? Because isn't there a country that was a breakaway?
Somaliland?
Oh, maybe I'm thinking of Somalia and Somaliland, maybe?
Possibly.
Maybe it was one of those.
Anyway, she listed off a bunch of stuff, leaving out Tibet, of course, right? And
what do you mean, of course?
Oh, well, because she probably never heard about that on TikTok. So,
Oh, okay, gotcha. Applying a political bend there.
Ooh, that's a spicy take.
you know, when you talk to Zoomers about the various places they want to free, Tibet doesn't usually make it on the list. And when you bring up Tibet, they say, well, they're better off now. All the things they say are not proper arguments for
Any other place ever.
right?
Crazy. Imagine if you're like,
they're better off now. They were living under a religious theocracy before, blah blah. And while I may not like a religious theocracy, I don't see how you can point to that and be like, that one's good, but all these other ones are bad, right?
Yeah.
So,
colonization's good when
right.
you like it.
So
Yeah.
anyway, that's what caused my Hawaii pick for the next video.
Interesting. So, I don't know how much you can foreshadow, but would you say the Free Hawaii movement is like rooted in a like understandable kind of like concern about colonization, or does it seem like it's based on like a lot of faux history?
I would have to say,
Or is it a bad question?
Or even before what is Free Hawaii?
Yeah.
From
okay.
who?
Right.
What is
okay.
yeah?
So I guess the Free Hawaii movement is to get Hawaii out of the United States of America. I guess that's the loftier goal, right? Some of them want a specific part, this area is ours, like a reservation sort of. Some of them want federal recognition, but the overall movement is against that because if we become, speaking for them, if we become federally recognized,
You're entrenched.
under the United States, yeah, that's how it'll be. So they're kind of holding out for everything, right? They just want all of it. So that's the goal. How Hawaii became part of the United States is incredibly complicated. We all know Native American history. We're all told those stories about the Pilgrims and the Trail of Tears and the smallpox blankets and the Wounded Knee. We all know. We know all those stories, right? And so that gets transplanted onto Hawaii, and we think that what happened to the Cherokee and the Sioux happened to Hawaii, when that isn't actually the case. For most of Hawaiian history, Hawaii was an independent kingdom. So
The people are also Polynesian, right?
Correct.
They're not
Yeah, correct. So, like, in 1819, they abolished their own religion. It's called the Kapu system. King Kamehameha I united the islands in a very bloody war. Then he died, and his son took over. And according to the old system, that meant all land would be redivided and go to the different chiefs and stuff. And he was like, no, we're not doing that anymore. No more religion, because it's all the same. Like
The religion required the separation.
religion was politics. It was the economy. It was recreation. It was everything. So they abolished it.
What was their religion?
It was called the Kapu system.
The Kapu system.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Tahitian equivalent is taboo. You're probably more familiar with the word taboo. So they abolished it, and then like 4 or 5 months later, Protestant missionaries showed up. And unlike the Pilgrims, when these missionaries showed up, the people literally had no religion because they had abolished it. They tore down their own temples, they burned the idols, all of that. They got rid of everything.
Wow.
They did that themselves before missionaries showed up. And that alone like blows up everything you've learned about like the Cherokee and the Sioux, where they were forced into schools to Christianize them and all that. That didn't happen in Hawaii. And America had no power, so they couldn't have forced Hawaii to do that either. That was all them, right? And this is 1819. The newest state was like Maine. We hadn't even crossed the Mississippi yet. Like we had no territorial ambitions for an island on the other side of the world. So, they abolished their own religion. The monarchy had been incested so long that Kamehameha I was the first and only monarch to have children, actually.
Like they were just so, like their genes were so damaged from incestuous relationships.
Right. A lot of them just straight up couldn't have kids.
Wow.
Yeah. And then a few of them would, but they die at a few months or a few days, that kind of stuff. When Kamehameha I became king, no future monarch had kids. They were all his sons, cousins, or nephews, I should say, or distant relations that were elected king. So that happened. And white people, not only from America, but Britain, France, Germany, they were all living in Hawaii. And the king made them citizens, gave them land, all that kind of stuff. And over time, they grew their political power and they were elected to the legislature and stuff. And the legislature is the one that overthrew the queen, right? So, imagine you're some third country, and in America, Congress overthrew the president, and they both look to you saying, help us figure this out. Like, who are you going to side with, Congress or the president or the king or queen in this case, right? Like, what do you do here? And that was a huge debate in America for like 5 or 6 years before they finally took it. And the only reason they took it was the Spanish-American War. Aside from that, it wouldn't have happened. So,
Can I ask a random seafaring question? I didn't even understand this when the Polynesians did it. How do they find Hawaii? It's like a little thing, like way out in the middle of nowhere.
Right. So this is a topic that will make some people mad, right?
Did they know that the island was there? Or did
Obviously
they just...
not. How would you know, right?
Okay, they just found it, yeah.
Right. I mean, so the story is that the Polynesians are these expert celestial navigators, right? Which on its face, I mean, sure, right? Great. But how do you think like the Europeans got there? Were they using GPS? They were also using celestial navigation, right? So it's not like this was unique.
There's a very weird phenomenon. God, I saw this. Somebody gave this like 5-second explanation or whatever, like 10 years ago, and it stuck with me forever, where once you removed enough from a people historically, they become aliens or barbarians, and every single thing they do is just like, it's simultaneously incredibly condescending and patronizing while also trying to be nice at the same time. So it'll be a thing where it's like, yeah, these people were expert navigators. They knew that the stars stayed in the same place in the sky. And it's like, yeah, they weren't on TikTok all day. Every single human being on the planet probably to some extent realized that the stars are about, they look in the sky all day. There's no light pollution or anything. Like they probably, But that kind of thing happens a lot. Where it's like they knew how to make things out of animal furs, and it's like, probably the very first person ever to watch a goat's fucking hair fall off weave something. But I'm sorry, I hear those types of things. That trope like comes up a lot. It drives me insane.
So I mean, the story is that of course they knew it was there, right? But the reality, you can't navigate to somewhere if you don't know where it exists, right?
What's the story? I don't, because I'm Canadian, so you can assume I know nothing about the Hawaii. Why would people assume that they knew it was there?
Well, so the people in Hawaii are the Polynesian people that come from areas around is that around like New Zealand, Indonesia, in that area, or?
Hawaii, Tahiti, New Zealand.
That's
the triangle.
Tahiti is?
It's like closer to South America.
I was going to say South America.
Okay, well, me, I didn't even know it was the origination. Because the Maui people are Polynesian as well, right?
There are no Maui people. I don't know what that, no.
What does that mean?
I mean, there's an island called Maui.
Do you mean Maori people?
Maori.
Sorry.
New Zealand.
Yeah,
yes,
in New Zealand. Yeah, my bad.
Oh,
okay.
yeah. I was
That's where all my
Maori.
knowledge of Polynesian. Okay. I didn't know if you're making some huge political statement around. I was like, New Zealand's on really good terms with their indigenous people. Holy okay, Jesus Christ. Okay, Maori.
Yeah.
Not Maui. Okay, sorry, because Maui is an island in Hawaii. Okay. But okay. So these were the Polynesian people originated from Tahiti, and they were able to find impossibly small islands in a huge vast sea of, and this is when they didn't have like massive ships or anything. So okay.
Well, okay. So I mean, the migration pattern was from Asia. I don't know how the camera. Okay. Anyway, Asia to Tahiti, and then from Tahiti back. That's how it worked.
How did they? The question, I guess, when I'm asking like how could they find it, is like I see somebody like, I'm going to take a ship out into the middle of this vast body of water, and there's like a 99.9% chance that I die, but maybe I find a really small island that no one's ever heard of before. Is that like how it worked? Or
just almost everyone died, and then a couple really lucky people were like, an island.
Well, I wouldn't be able to tell you how many people died, right?
Oh, of course, yeah.
And we don't hear stories about the people who don't come back.
Sure.
Really, right? So we can't really know how many, but you can assume, right? There's no way that they left from an island and sailed directly to Hawaii, and they were like, boom, here it is. Like, of course, like dozens of people went out before they, finally.
So did the Oh, my mind is blanking. The Protestant missionaries. Did the missionaries know the island existed
Oh,
by the
yes.
time they
Yeah,
got
yeah,
there?
yeah.
Okay, so the missionaries didn't stumble upon it, but the
Correct. Yeah, yeah.
Polynesians did. Yeah.
Okay, so Hawaii was discovered for the third time in September 1778 by Captain Cook.
What do you mean by third? So third is obviously
Right.
white people.
Right.
First would be
Okay, so Hawaii was found 3 separate times. The first time
Vikings. I'm sorry. Oh, go ahead.
the first time was around 500 AD by people from the Marquesas Islands, and then about 1500 or 1200 people from Tahiti came, and they conquered the islands, and that's how it was when white people showed up in 1778.
okay.
So it was the third time. It was discovered in 1778, and almost immediately British and American and French traders were showing up. So they were getting contact, but we're talking like you can count how many ships there were on one hand every year, until the 1820s when whaling picked up, and that's when everything started.
Okay.
So yeah, they showed up in 1820 intentionally because actually there was a guy named Henry Obukia. He was a Hawaiian, and he joined a sailing crew to escape Kamehameha's war. And he found himself in Boston, where he went to a bunch of missionaries and said, please come to Hawaii and civilize our islands.
Jesus.
And he is the reason why the ABCFM sent the missionaries to Hawaii.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so Hawaiians got rid of their own religion because they didn't want to fracture again. Did they take to Christianity like
Yes.
kind of welcomely? Like they
Yeah.
were very open to it?
Yeah, almost immediately.
Why were they open to it after they just got rid of their religion?
Because they had been seeing all these white people breaking their rules. In the Kapu system, like women weren't allowed to eat bananas or pig, or these certain berries. You weren't allowed to cross shadows with a chief. It's stuff like that. You weren't allowed to catch a fish out of
Very
season.
restrictive.
Right. And the punishment for all of that was death. There was no like finger cutting off, or it was death.
Even for like the woman eating a banana?
Yeah.
Wow.
How can you afford to kill so many people? What is the fucking population of this place? It's got to be like 500 people.
Right. No, at the time of Captain Cook's arrival, it was around 300,000.
Jesus. That's way bigger than I would assume. Okay.
These people didn't have diseases. They didn't have smallpox or flu or anything, so their kids weren't dying. So if they weren't doing this, they'd probably hit civilizational collapse. Just
Okay.
yeah. So in a roundabout way, it was kind of a population control thing.
Not
not-
any incest.
That was just the kings.
The incest, yeah, it was only among the chiefs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There was no trickle down of like incestuousness being viewed
Well, I mean, there
as a
may
good
have
thing.
been among the commoners, maybe, but there's
Was it
no.
viewed as a sacrilege, like a bad thing that was occurring, or was it just kind of assumed it was?
So among the chiefs, they believed in mana. That's actually where I'd never known where mana came from. I thought it was just a video game stat, you know. but
Like
they,
MANA.
yes,
Oh.
yeah. They believed in mana, and when you kill someone, you get their mana. Once you have the mana in you, the only way to keep it in your bloodline is to be with your sister, and that keeps your mana pure, and your child will be even more spiritually powerful than you. And yeah, that's
So it was
how-
mostly siblings. There was a lot of sibling
most
stuff.
they tried to. That would have been the highest possible.
Okay.
But then it would be cousins and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they took to Christianity because they had seen all these white people eating bananas and fishing and doing all the stuff that they're not allowed to do, and the volcanoes weren't exploding, nothing was happening. And also, they started dying of smallpox and flu and all that, whereas the white people weren't.
Oh.
So they were like, there must be something to that religion that's keeping them safe. Right. Yeah. And so they took to it really quickly. Yeah.
Interesting. That's really similar to, I'm sure you're aware of this, like the story of like why the Vikings kind of embraced Christianity is because some missionary, I don't even know if this is true, it's the folklore, but a missionary went out to this like sacred tree. I think it was like Zeus's tree. And if you touched it, they were like, Zeus will strike you down. And he well, not Zeus. What would it be? Thor. Thor. What was the Viking version? Was it Thor?
Odin.
Odin. Thank you. And a missionary just like went out and chopped down the tree. And they're like, well, I guess your God's stronger than Odin. So we'll
Yeah.
just take
Imagine
like,
if he would have been unlucky and gotten struck by lightning or had like a stroke or a seizure.
or the
my
tree
God.
like fell on him or
The
something.
Vikings would have been, that was a forever religion at that point. If that would happen.
It is a forever religion. Okay.
Something very similar happened in Hawaii, actually. A queen named Kapiolani went down to the volcano crater, Pele's volcano, and she openly defied her by throwing berries and all kinds of. It's a very important moment that's very well documented. Kapiolani's, dang it, now I'm forgetting the word, but her
It's okay. I
defiance
called
of Pele,
Odin.
you know.
Yeah, I called Odin Zeus, so you're good. You don't have to worry about it.
As you've kind of dug through, I guess, historical things, and you've done reading and research, and you've published videos, what do you think are some of the largest, two categories, what are some of the largest untrue things that we've just kind of heard, like passed down, where it's like in English class, like the knight's armor was so heavy, if they fell over, they were stuck forever, like that. Yeah.
We were just talking about this before we started filming.
Yeah, like that kind of thing. And then what are a couple that are like meaningfully, like this probably has an influence in our mind, and it's really sad that we think this. Yeah, first category, fun things.
Ooh. Let me come back to that.
Okay.
Let me hit the other one. I think one of the biggest misconceptions, one of my biggest historical pet peeves, is the way we've sort of visualized the past. So I don't know if you've seen like Moana, or you have, right? Okay, so it's a nice nuclear family. There's a chief dad and a wife, you know, and two kids and like a dog, right? Like it's a very nuclear family.
Yeah.
And we have this perception throughout all of history, really. Whenever you try to imagine 1200s France, you think, okay, nuclear family, but no computer, phone, TV.
And maybe
you
grandma and grandpa live in the house.
Yeah, you like subtract things that you know didn't exist, but you still sort of keep the same, like, yeah, nuclear families, and you know, you meet your neighbors and all. And it's like, no, none of that. Like, we were living 20, 30 people to a house. We're all sleeping on the same floor. Like, this nuclear family thing is very new. But it's something I have tackled in like every single video. I'm talking about the Pilgrims, and there's all this media of like nice nuclear families sitting there eating with Indians and stuff. And it's like, this isn't, it gives people the impression, well, it helps reinforce the idea that modern morality can be applied to the past. You know, if they lived just like us, just without this, and this, so they must have had the same values similarly, which is not the case, like throughout most of history, really.
I think this is destructive too, because it inhibits our ability to understand how we could make missteps. Because when you look at the past kind of retrospectively like that, it's very obvious what the right thing should have been. And everybody on the wrong side of the issue should have known. So they were bad people. And if that issue ever came up in our society, we would obviously be on the right side, because we wouldn't be stupid enough to be pro-slavery or anti-women voting or pro-Nazi. Or obviously make the right choice. But yeah, the misconceptualizing of what the past looked like leads people to have bad ideas of what the future could look like.
Right. Yeah. Or the idea that the past was like nice and tidy. We seem to think that right now is just crazy complicated, and politicians can't seem to work together on anything. But really, that's always been the case. Like, I'm researching Hawaii right now, so it's on my mind. But like I said, it took them 5 or 6 years of debating back and forth as to whether Hawaii should be, because, well, it'll hurt the Louisiana sugar growers and all this other stuff. And it was voted down. It like Hawaii was not going to be part of the U.S. And then a few months later, Spanish-American War happened. But like, none of this is clean. None of it wasn't like the Civil War ended and immediately they passed the anti-slavery amendment and the voting amendment and all that. No, that happened years afterwards, and took a long time, and all these debates and all kinds of, police actions and new rule, all kinds of stuff that just makes it way more complicated. And I think that plays into what you were talking about before we started about just having to learn dates. right? You just learn that this passed on this year, this passed on this year. You don't learn like why, or why there's this huge gap between them or anything like that.
One thing I tell people to do sometimes is like imagine like you're 50 years forward and what will be written about right now, like the whole ordeal of COVID and the 2007 crash and like January 6th. These things might be a paragraph in a social studies book,
Right.
like at the end too, because you don't even really get to modern history much in your high school and grade school. So, so a thing that you lived through, and there's going to be a moment in everybody that's listening to these lives where they've got a child who comes and they're like, hey, what did they mean here when they said that there was a riot at the Capitol? Or what do they mean here when they said you guys had COVID and you were inside for a long time? And you're going to be reading that book like, no, my God, you don't. They're missing so much here. Like this was so horrible, and they're saying that the U.S. did this, but every single state was different, and sometimes places in the states. And it's like, and it's funny because we'll look at that, but then like you said, people will go back and like, oh, England was like this. Everywhere.
Yeah. Yes.
And even today, people will do it where I'll be like, you can talk to a guy who's lived in London his whole life who might not be able to tell you anything about London because he only lived in one neighborhood. You know, people that live I'm from Chicago. Really, motherfucker? How long? Where do you live?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm from a suburb an hour and a half outside of Chicago. Okay, thank you. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Like even in the US this happens. So yeah.
One of the things you pointed out in your vegan video that I thought was really interesting, because I think about presentism a lot, and how this idea that we think the history was so clear and direct and simple. I think it also leads to people thinking that the future is so simple and direct and clear, right? I think a lot of people, when they see certain people getting elected, or they see kind of the snap right that's happening worldwide in democracies, they're like, yeah, but like, you know, democracy will be fine. And it's like, well, you shouldn't assume that, right? Like the actions of all of us collective individuals will decide the future history of whether that is fine, whether democracy weathers the next like 100 years. I remember you saying, one of my biggest fears is always like being on the wrong side of history. Mm-hmm. And I found it really interesting in your vegan video where you're talking about if you were anti-slavery, pro-women's suffrage, you were also probably a vegan.
Right, yeah. The omni cause, yeah.
Yeah.
That's sort of always been. I mean, we sort of joke about it now, but even back then, like if you were anti-slavery, if you were pro-feminist, we're talking 1800s feminist, you were probably a vegetarian. Yeah.
And it creates such this interesting level of being on the right side of history. What does that actually like mean? Or like it creates this spectrum for me of like, where's like all the neutral people? Because probably there was a lot of neutral people that were like open to like women voting, but they had some concerns, and were like open to ending slavery, but they had some concerns about like civil war and all that sort of thing. And it makes you go like, how do you look at these people and like understand it in a way that doesn't just immediately because when people talk about this, even me saying like people being open-minded about slavery, they're going to just think, well, they were horrible people. And it's like, well, they were probably mostly normal people.
Yeah.
How do you engage with history without like judging it morally?
I don't have a hard time with that. I guess it's just because of how much I've studied that I know sort of the general attitude of what was going on at the time, that, everyone imagines that, if they were back then or in the 1860s, they would have been against slavery, right?
I would have been.
Okay. I mean,
would you give up meat?
I mean, that's definitely possible, but they aren't willing to entertain the idea that they might have, the wrong view. I mean, I had some wrong views 10 years ago. So it's very easy for me to imagine that if I was in the 1850s, I'd probably feel the same way as most of the people living around me, because that's just how it is, right? But this also plays into like determinism. A lot of people, they look at the world as it is right now, and this is how it was supposed to be. All of those decisions leading up, that was supposed to happen that way, right? There's no, well, it could have happened or should have happened differently. It's all of that was leading to this point, and I want to go to Mars, so these are the steps that we're going to take to get there because I'm determined that this is where humanity should go, right? I wish it was that easy that we could just define a goal and move towards it, right? But most people they just want to grill, they just want to sit home and watch TV.
Raise their kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's a really important argument. I don't. I think Aquinas was the guy that had a bunch of like syllogistic arguments for God. I think it's the teleological argument is the idea that the people will say that like the planet Earth is the perfect distance from the sun for life, and so if it wasn't here, like everything would be horrible. And it's like it's similar to saying that like what are the chances that this puddle of water is the exact same shape as the puddle shaped hole that is in it? Like, well, that's the shape that it would be there, but but it could be different. Like, who's to say that the Earth looks the way that it does now, but it could be totally different, closer or further from, who's to say what it could have looked like. And right now where you exist, history's good and it's always been this way and we're in this area and that's great. And it's like, well, that's, you say that now, but if you're somebody starving to death in the Holodomor and you're coming to the end of your life, like, wow, history really fucked me over here. Or if you're in the Holocaust, or if you're a Native, Indian Native American, you're like, fuck, so yeah, people are very, you can call it presentism, or people are born to a certain area. And kind of what you said, like you probably have the morals of people around you. It's funny that a person will be like, yeah, like I think I've got the correct moral answer objectively. And it's like, wow, how convenient for you that it just so happens to match with every single person that's living around you. What are the chances of that? Like congratulations. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the big issues that I have when it comes to debating current day stuff, this comes up so much, maybe in every topic, I guess. I wouldn't consider myself having seriously read anything until like a year ago. So I'm just catching up on actually understanding anything. But for like Ukraine, Russia, or for Israel, Palestine, when you listen to people talk about these things, a lot of their modern justifications kind of come from the mythos of the past.
Yes.
So some of these historical narratives are almost necessarily normatively loaded because people will draw modern day ethical justification for their actions from the kind of mythos of the past. And so if these facts were different, or if they weren't morally tainted, they would lose, I guess, some of the righteous power that they have today, which is,
Right. Well, it's sort of a selective fact choosing, I guess.
Depending on who,
Right. I mean, you mentioned Israel, Palestine. They often leave out that Jews were kicked out of every country around the area, that kind of stuff. And I'm seeing this with Hawaii as well. They just sort of leave out the
inconvenient stuff.
Whereas if they had included that, like we could have a discussion about this, right? Like, okay, this is what happened and we can figure out where to move from here. But if it's no, I want this because of this story I heard on Twitter, like.
And it's annoying too, because it's like these things, they don't even take away from your argument. So you shouldn't have to make this up. Like some conservatives, I don't know if Canada's honest, there's other people say things like, well, black people's lives in the United States are better than they would have been in Africa, right? And it's tempting to fight against that point, but it's also like, okay, so what?
Yeah.
Maybe that's true. Like Bill Gates could maybe capture like homeless children and lock them up in his home for 10 years and raise them maybe better, but that's not a justification for the action.
It's like justifying being like, yeah, but the kids who come out of really appreciate being alive.
Oh,
and
you're
it's like,
didn't you know Einstein was a baby? Well, me. I guess now my whole position has changed. You don't even have to fight that argument. Yes, it's very annoying to see people try to rewrite history because I think they have to maintain what should otherwise be like a morally acceptable path. Yeah.
My first thesis, my working thesis on the Hawaii video was, if the truth is on your side, why lie? Like the Hawaiian people were screwed over. Annexation shouldn't have happened. It's just a fact, right? So then why lie about like, oh, the missionaries forced our Christianity on us, and why lie about that when the truth is fine?
Yeah. It's that like narrative serving that like in many ways it creates, like when I hear people who are like really distrustful of these types of narratives and they'll point to all the lies, I'll be like, I agree that those are lies, right? That doesn't mean that like maybe the whole idea that they're talking about is incorrect, but yeah, those are lies. And it's so frustrating because I feel like at least somebody who like advocates on the left, like the left does this a lot where they kind of like somewhat pick and pull and recreate certain mythos. And
to be clear, the right absolutely does.
Oh yeah,
just to be clear,
right?
I already said
talk to the right.
I already said I'm being critical of the left because I'm left leaning, right? Like I want left ideas to like succeed, and so like when I see it happening on the left, I'm just like, why? We don't even need to lie. Like we just don't need to lie about these things.
Right.
When it comes to studying history, how do you recommend somebody even start? Like, how do you approach studying history and thinking about it in a good way?
You have to read books. there's anything else is just a pale substitute. Documentaries, all that stuff. You have to read books. That's the only way to do it. I tried to do it without books for a long time, but once I started, I want to say the Scientology video was the first time I read a book for a video. Everything else was sort of like articles on the internet or Wikipedia even. But now it's books, and every video there are more and more books. So far I've read 7 books for Hawaii. And I think I did like 8 for Seventh-day Adventists, something like that. But that's the only way. It's the only way. I wish there was some other way. I really do. But that's it.
How do you vet books? How do you know which book is good?
Now that's a difficult question, because it requires critical thinking, right? You have to be able to and I don't think critical thinking is a skill that can be taught.
Jesus.
Oh.
I don't think so. So how do you know whether a source is good or not? I'll give you an example from the book I was just reading. The guy says that when Vancouver arrived in Hawaii, he promised the king that he would send teachers of his religion. And so when the missionaries showed up in 1820, the Hawaiians were confused because they were expecting British missionaries, not American missionaries. That was the quote. And as soon as I read it, I was like, that doesn't sound right.
In what year?
In what the missionaries showed up in 1820.
Okay.
Right. So right away I was like, that doesn't sound right to me. There's something about that sentence that just is off. And I wouldn't be able to articulate to someone else why that is, except to say that I know Vancouver came in 1794. So you're telling me they waited 26 years and they were expecting a different accent? Like,
Okay, so so I'm agreeing and disagreeing with some things you're saying. Unfortunately, people will ask me when it comes to news, like, how do you know what a good source is, or how do you know what to read or whatever? And I say this now. So I started taking Vyvanse at the end of 2023. So that's why I say last year is the first time I've been able to sit down and like read like a full book, a full article, a full like long stuff. And my answer, I realize, is that like there is no shortcut for knowing the material.
Yeah.
Because once you know the material, there's just there's something to be said for having like a working vocabulary and knowledge.
Yes.
And we intuitively know this because like do you play video games at all?
oh yeah, of course.
Like any FPS games or whatever?
Yeah.
Yeah, like if I were to come up to you, we do this with parents, like, oh, is that Call of Duty on the Nintendo that you got? You hear one thing and you instantly know. Or if somebody comes up to you like, oh, that's a good computer. How much memory do you have in that? What are you even asking me, right? You immediately know. But the only reason why those sentences seem so simple and easy, it's like, okay, we just have to remember this and that. No. What happens is you have such a fluid understanding of all of the underlying facts that there is a semantic, there's a vocabulary that develops in knowing these things. Yeah. And then you immediately will have an idea of what's right or what's wrong. I don't read books and topics now that I know a lot about, and I'm like, oh God, I don't know if the source is good or not. I know what a lot of the primary and secondary sources say, so I know if it's going to be bullshit or not. Yeah. Like if somebody brings up a particular thing about like for Israel Palestine, they'll say things like, oh, the United States supported Israel since the very beginning, and it's like there are like 25 different reasons why I know that can't possibly be true. Okay, the U.S. wasn't even taking fucking Jews from the Holocaust, and you're telling me they supported Israel? Or like people say things like, yeah, Israel was supported in the 30s and 40s, or whatever. It's like Israel wasn't even a fucking country yet, right? And then much like what you say, like that sentence can't be true. You described it as critical thinking, but it's not even. It's just having a familiarity with the source material. And there are some, like if you're willing to read a lot of articles or watch like good link documentaries or read like these huge fucking wiki articles, I think you can kind of get there. I don't think there's a shortcut for books, and ultimately all of them are sourcing off of books. But if all you've engaged with are headlines or like tweets, you're lost. You have and somebody could tell you literally anything about a thing. Yeah. And I'm sure that when you've gotten the familiarity with it, you can tell very quickly, like, this guy has no fucking idea what he's talking about. Almost immediately. When like you just a simple, there's a million examples I can think of, but like I'm sure you can think of it with the Hawaii stuff and everything else. If someone will say something, it's like, you have no idea what you're talking about. There
are a lot of sovereignty activist documentaries related to Hawaii. And yes, that would happen a lot, where as soon as someone would start talking, they'd say something that's just a little, like they used just the wrong term, the slightly wrong term. And you're like, this person's a moron. I probably shouldn't have said that.
Sure.
But, you know,
Not a moron, but they clearly are. What they have it's not working.
They're not
'Cause-
an expert. They're not an
Yes.
expert to be listened to.
There's an interesting thing that happened where when I didn't know anything about science, I had heard, like, I figured that, like, oh, scientists know all the answers or whatever. And then kind of like you learn a bit and there's this understanding of, like, if you believe in a thing, you can find a study to support everything. And you can find any fact to support anything ever. But then when you read more, it's like, no. There's a lot of convergence in most fields around, unless it's like a cutting edge new idea, or when a scientist says something like, we have especially depending on, they need to stop fucking doing this, but scientists will say shit like, we have no idea how anesthesia works. And when they say this, they're hitting it like the most fundamental. Like they'll say like, oh yeah, like ketamine slows down like the neurotransmission between all these parts of the brain that we believe, blah, 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 blah. And then they're like, but we don't really know how that works. But when somebody hears that, we don't know how it works, they think they're like just injecting a random thing in your body. It's like, well, the guy's not fucking saying anything,
I
so
hope
let's
he falls
fucking
asleep.
go. Yeah. So same thing generally with history. There are people that study it professionally. They speak the languages, they go to the archives of those governments, they dig through and they do a lot of work and research to get this stuff down. And then two, there are a ton of other people that, you know, secondary and tertiary people that will compile it and look at, and there's usually a convergence in the field with some things that will be controversial, but rarely will it be as controversial as like, there's a 50-year difference between these two things or nobody knew. Generally, I think when I hear people that are well-studied or well-versed in an area debating a thing, they're not usually debating on like, is this fact true or not? They'll be debating on like, what was the contribution of this particular thing or that particular thing to this.
I was going to say, in fact, that's a really good heuristic to even understand like a developing field. Like the more divergent the camps are in a specific like area of study, the more you know that that is a burgeoning area or an area that needs a lot more data. Because as you collect data, you tend toward the middle. So if you have an area of study or if you're looking at scientific papers and you realize that there's two very distinctive kind of mutually exclusive camps, that means you should be a lot more cautious, in my mind at least, about the whole topic. Because it's like, okay, even the experts aren't even, aggregating towards a thing, which in most topics they are. But when they are divergent like that, that's where I think like that's the biggest cue to be most cautious about that topic, because we really don't know yet.
Right. That's typically why I don't do current topics as well, because they're still happening and I won't be able to make a video about it until, June or whatever. But also like the facts, we could find out about some secret organization that was behind all of it 2 years from now. Right. So like, I don't want to put something out there and be like, yes, this is how it's happening. This is what's going on, only to find out later that, there was stuff I didn't know about.
It was the CIA.
Yeah.
Drats.
Yeah.
Darn, they were building tunnels. That's crazy.
So what, I don't know if you answered my question, if you're dodging it. Going back, no, I'm just kidding. Right. What are a couple of big narrative things or big like historical facts where you think that people being misled or misunderstanding this is manifesting in some very negative way today?
I think the biggest one I can come up with is the convict leasing and stuff that happened after slavery ended. Because still today we have that 1350 meme, 13% of the population does 50% of the crime or something like that. Because there's this perception that Black people are just more prone to criminality.
What's convict leasing?
Okay, so
Start us there.
After slavery ended, there's still cotton and stuff that needed to be picked, right? So the amendment abolishing slavery said that except for as punishment for a crime. So they would arrest people, charge them with a crime, and sentence them to labor, and they'd be put to work on a cotton field. I grew up learning that in elementary school and high school and all that, and in my mind it was murder, theft, that kind of stuff. And it wasn't until I read that book in 2020 or whatever.
Which book, if you could tell us?
Slavery by Another Name, something like that, yeah. Where I found out what the crimes were. And it was like trespassing. And by trespassing, they mean walking alongside a railroad, whistling at a white woman, just all kinds of just the pettiest stuff you could possibly imagine, right?
There's not enough and murderers to pick your fields.
Yes, yes. They had to really scrape the bottom of the barrel to dig up crimes on these people. And so while that's happening in the North, they're hearing about all these black people who are getting arrested for crimes and stuff. And so that's how this myth developed of them being more prone to criminality. I mean, I've walked alongside a railroad. I've been unemployed. That was another one. Vagrancy was, they would arrest you for vagrancy. You know, slaves who were just freed, not having a job.
Especially because a lot of, if my understanding is correct, if I'm thinking about this correctly, most of the slaves that are freed are going to be in southern states that are
Yes.
highly racist as well.
Yes.
So the likelihood that you want to now employ somebody who 5 years ago, 10 years ago was a slave would be very low, right?
Right.
And my understanding as well, the poor working white did a lot to try to prevent the poor attempting to work black communities from getting jobs as well, because they would be competing for the same labor jobs.
And that continued all the way up through the fucking Civil Rights Act, there where unions and people were trying to push
Yeah.
black people out of working higher skilled labor because they don't want to compete with them. So that's like in our very recent history. Yeah.
Right.
And so they could be arrested for basically something that systemically was really hard to avoid, which is being unemployed.
Right. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Being unemployed or playing dice, you know, that kind
Although
of.
in that case, I wouldn't even say that was systemic. I would say that was just a direct, you were a fucking slave a few years ago.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
fuck, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But then it continued with debt peonage, which was you owe me money, so you'll work for me until it's paid off. But also, while you're working for me, you owe me rent and food, and yeah, so it would just pile on, right? So, but the convict leasing, I think that's I keep hitting the microphone. I think that's one of the biggest myths that still sort of affects us today. And you brought up earlier that like, yeah, there's more, people will say like, yeah, there's more crime in these neighborhoods, so we need to patrol these more. And if you go looking for a crime, you will find one. If a cop went to my hotel room right now, I'm sure he could find something, some reason to arrest me or give me a ticket or fine or something. If you want to find something, you will.
I know where the party's at tonight. Jesus. Man. Do you get irritated from a historical perspective when one of the things that people seem to do is a thing can't be bad on its own, so they have to kind of call it by...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So like H-1B stuff, people will call it like indentured servitude or modern slavery
Yes.
or genocide or whatever. Like these terms get thrown around, yeah.
I mean, the genocide one is probably the biggest one.
Sure. Trying to stay away from Israel-Palestine because I want your
Right.
audience to fucking hate you because I'm
Right.
like the pro-genocide guy. So I don't know if you've done like a lot of Israel-Palestine. I don't want to
When he
get
says
into
he's
the-
pro-genocide, he's not pro-genocide, just to be very,
okay.
very clear.
Sorry, yeah.
Well, okay, I wasn't gonna touch on that, you
Sure.
know, but like the Hawaiians, they say that. A lot of the Native Americans say that too. Where this word genocide, and I get where they're coming from, but genocide is also like a legally defined crime, right? So aside from that, I'm trying to think of another example where they put this, the bayonet constitution in Hawaii. In 1887, the legislature forced the king to sign a constitution that made it so that he couldn't appoint his own ministers, all kinds of stuff, just a bunch of stuff that kneecapped the monarchy. Nobody called it the bayonet constitution until decades afterwards. And today we call it the bayonet constitution. And there's this whole mythos that came up around it where the king was forced to sign this at gunpoint, at the point of a bayonet, and that's why it's called the bayonet. And that's not true. That didn't happen at all. There was definitely a threat, an implied threat of force, but the guns weren't pointed at him, right?
Sure.
But still today, it's the bayonet constitution, and if you Google it, you'll have all these stories about how guns were pointed at the guy. Nobody, not the Hawaiians, not the missionaries, not the white people, said anything about guns.
A recent history example that I'm kind of reminded of for this has to do with the crime bill, because a lot
The 94 crime bill?
94 crime
Yeah,
bill,
okay.
because a lot of people are under the assumption that crime bill came and it was just like white people trying to put black people back in chains or whatever, and it was like everybody hated it, but like at the time, like crack crack epidemics and violence in especially black neighborhoods were like destroying
Right.
African American communities. And like the Congressional Black Caucus was a huge advocate
they
for that
wanted
crime.
it, yeah.
Yes, yeah. And it was a thing that everybody in America was like, we need to do something about our crime. And retrospectively, there are aspects of that, I think like 3-strike laws and stuff where it's like, this is probably not good.
Yeah.
But people will look at the impact after and they'll be like, oh, well, at the time they were trying to
They
be
were
as racist as
planning
possible.
that.
And it's like,
Yeah.
happens a lot with the Hart-Celler immigration bill too. They were trying to get all the Mexicans. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to pause this. I think the dogs are going to probably keep sponsoring the episode. Do you want me to just close the windows?
If you want to, it's going to get hot in here though.
It will get very hot.
We haven't even started
Very
screaming
hot.
yet.
The lights are really warm and we
Yeah.
have no AC.
No, it's good. We're fine.
I think, yeah. I mean,
I doubt the dog. You know what? Sulak is going to kill me because I don't say anything. You guys do this. Don't hit the fucking table.
Sorry.
Sulak's going to kill me.
And
because
the
I'm
mic,
saying
I'm
anything,
going to squeeze it
but you're probably all right.
but closer.
yeah.
Perfect. Sorry, not to derail us. I was actually going to empathize a little bit with like going back to the genocide and even like what you're talking about, like viewing this intention. I think I've been thinking a lot about people like applying the word genocide or like these really morally loaded labels to situations. And I think while I think it's incorrect in that it waters down and it dilutes the impact of the word, right? To the point where racist was used so aggressively to the point that like a lot of Republicans are like, yeah, I am racist because it doesn't mean anything now, right? Which is the worst outcome for the word to mean. But I can also understand it because on the flip side, you've got years and years and years of basically most Americans, if we focus on like the American issue, kind of putting a blind eye to the treatment of black people, to the fact that what was the last legal? 1948 was the last legal black slave.
42.
1942, right? And so how these issues are relevant and still impacting people today. And so I understand the emotional need. This is really common, for example, in trauma and cases of like, for example. So one of the things that rape advocates will do with victims is they'll be like, it's really important that you don't embellish the story at all. Because a lot of victims actually often do when reporting to the police because they feel so emotionally distressed and they're worried that people won't take it seriously, oftentimes understandably worried. But if they're caught legally embellishing the story, now they're not even a credible witness, right? And so there's this inverse thing that you have to do with victims where you have to say, I understand the desire to blow the story bigger so people understand and resonate with the emotional impact. And also it like degrades the level of reliability people will give you in the future, which is this converse thing that's understandable where it's coming from. And it also destroys the messaging, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. I mean, we were talking about that with my old Columbus video, where it's like a lot of people claim he's responsible for killing millions, and I was like, well, no, it's only hundreds of thousands, which is still bad, but it's not embellished, right? And it's, again, if the truth is on your side, why lie about it? Now, I'd never heard that about rape victims, but that's interesting, and I can see where that comes from too. Yeah.
So I want to go back to critical thinking cannot be taught.
Yeah.
Why, I guess, first of all, what do you mean by critical thinking? And why do you think it can't be taught?
Well, I don't think it can be taught because you have to have that you have to have that base knowledge of stuff. Because you can't critically think about, and when I say critically think, I mean like apply it to other things you know. Like you read this and you're like, oh yeah, that's kind of like this other country that did that, or you relate it to other stuff, and you can't do that unless you know about the other country. So it's really, you need a broad base of fact-based knowledge in order for critical thinking to take place. Because if you have nothing to compare and contrast it to, then you're not critically thinking. You're just absorbing.
So then we were talking a bit before about that mental immunity movement and Julia Galef. How do you feel about like that scout mindset? The idea that essentially, well, I would agree, expertise can't be taught other than learning, right? There's no single trait critical thinking that can just be taken and generally applied to all things.
Right. Like if I were to put on a college class called Critical Thinking 101, like what would that even, it would have to be like, okay, we're going to learn some facts and we're going to learn how to distinguish them, right? Like you have to have something to work with.
I feel like you have to have like, if I think of critical thinking, I'm thinking of like very baseline navigating stuff. So like a propositional philosophy class where you can understand like an argument is like this conclusion logically follows given these two premises are true. Understanding stuff like that, and then understanding some basic stuff about like statistics, I think can help you kind of like navigate some claims. But like those two things that I just gave are a bit biased towards numberies things, and those can help you kind of evaluate whether you feel like somebody might be bullshitting on a claim without necessarily knowing about a thing. So a very common poor argument made is, here are two charts. I can show you that when person A has this quality, they're this high, but when person B has this quality, they're only this high. Really common one is marriage. Married men make way more money than single men. Therefore, and then this is the trouble part, they'll say, therefore, if you get married, you'll make more money. But that jump is not even remotely supported by any of the data. It doesn't make any sense to even say that. You don't have the causal link between the two, and there could be covariate factors where it's like, and it is the case that typically people get married once they hit like more stable financial positions, right? There's stuff like that, but unfortunately the critical thinking stuff is going to be, I think, relatively unique to the field that you're talking about.
Right.
So when it comes to history, I'm very critical if somebody says they've written multiple books and they're a historian in a subject, but they don't speak the language, because that means they've never consulted an original source in their entire life. And that's very suspect for a person that calls themselves a historian, because there are even pseudo-historians that will at least learn the fucking language. David Irving is a really good example for a lot of European history. At least he learned he could speak German, even if he ended up writing a bunch of bullshit. But like, yeah, when there are historians, pop historians or whatever, who've written for decades about a topic, but they can't read any of the source material, I'm like, that's very strange to call yourself a historian and do that. And I'm sure there's, through every other thing, through every field, there are going to be some heuristics, but it requires a level of critical thinking. And that when I say critical thinking, I mean that you know the things to kind of look out for, because you've developed some of that vocabulary in the field.
And there's a wisdom component to it as well. You have to deal with people for a decade or two before you can understand really, well, why did they make this decision? That kind of, you can't just read it and critically think about it. You have to have
context.
Experience and context. That's interesting. I would say I would mostly agree with that. I think there are certain skills that you can apply pretty broadly to improving things. Like, I think that there are certain skills that you could probably teach in public school. So I guess, like, can critical thinking be taught sort of in that, like, I think there are certain skills you can teach people that will just improve broadly their ability to engage with factual information regardless, right? So teaching them, Galef has this really interesting little test you can do for yourself where you get a bunch of, you actually go on our website, you get a bunch of truth statements, and you decide whether it's true or false, but then afterwards you have to say, how confident are you that you're right or wrong? And it's a really good check of being like, okay, well, if I think I'm right 100% of the time and I got 50% on this test of like true or false statements, my system to alert me of whether or not I should be confident is busted, and I need to drop that down, right? So there are those types of skills that I think you can build into people being like, okay, well, how much do you really know about statistics? Like, should you be confident that like X causes Y? Like, do you understand how inferences work? And you can train people to at least think, what do I maybe not know about this topic? Like, I feel like there are some heuristics that you can train that would vastly improve media literacy, et cetera, et cetera.
You just hit on something that I think is very critical, and that's the ability to know what do I not know? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So when you're reading a book and you hit a spot and you're like, I don't get it. Like, you have to know, like, what am I missing here? I need to, like, who was the governor? Like, what, something like that, whatever it is. As a teacher, I can give you an assignment, a newspaper article that I know there are 2 mistakes in it or something, and have you read it, and we can work through examples, and I can even tell you how to figure out that this sentence is wrong. But that's that's only for this article in this context. You aren't, that skill isn't necessarily transferable to reading the history of the Pilgrims. You know, like this is a newspaper article about what's happening right now, and you can ask Google if this is true, right? Whereas the Pilgrim stuff, that you ask Google and you're going to get who knows whose opinion from Reddit, you know? So, yeah.
I think learning about the fields is really important. There's a lot of, one thing that I'll tell people when we're reading a particular thing is like, sometimes it's good to just like take a step back and ask yourself, like, what is this even saying? It is not with like charts and graphs. Like, let's take a step back and like, what is this actually even telling us? Can we speak through that? Because sometimes people will state a fact and I'll just like ask a question about the statement. And then you can realize very quickly like the absurdity on its face. So two common ones, one that's come up on stream a lot, and then one that hasn't. But one is a common conservative talking point is that like 40,000 plus illegal murderers have snuck across the border or whatever.
Okay.
And
I
then,
thought it was 21 million.
So, yeah. And the question I always ask is like, these guys snuck across the border, and it's like, yeah, it's like Border Patrol didn't catch them or anything. It's like, no, how do they know they were murderers? And it's just immediately like, oh shit, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Or a common complaint I'll hear is people say like, oh, this medication is safe. Let me guess who paid for the study, the company that has the drug. And then you can ask them like, who the fuck else would pay for the study? They're adversaries. Or yeah, of course, no shit. But what you're supposed to see is if the researchers have the conflicts of interest. It's not like they're bringing their own like in-house researchers to come into it. But of course they're paying for their, no shit. What do you mean? Who else would pay for it?
Yeah.
There's like a lot. But I think, it's been said a lot. But, and on that thing about like understanding what you're reading, I'll never find this article, and at this point I'm convinced I made it up. I feel like I read a long time ago that adults can learn languages faster than children, but we think that we can't because of like neuroplasticity or whatever. But the author was making the argument that the reason why we can't is because we're so much smarter that we can use context clues to figure things out and not learn the language. Mm-hmm. And people are very good at intuitively doing context stuff. And you can read something and not know it and kind of, like piece together what it is, but that's not really knowing. And people make fun of me on this on stream sometimes because we could be reading, it could be fucking Wikipedia, it could be a medical article, whatever. But like if I don't know a word, I'll click through it, we'll read the next article. And then if I don't know a word there, and sometimes I'll be like 4 or 5 deep and I'm like, okay, we were on Investopedia trying to learn about the Federal Reserve, and now we're reading what's the difference between M1, M2, and M3 money supply. I don't know. We'll just keep clicking and reading, and then finally you have it all. It's like, okay, now we'll go back and read this. Because if I didn't know, if I had to go 6 wikis deep just to learn this term, how could I ever expect that? I would have figured that out with context clues, just reading the sentence. And then what happens is again, when you don't have that baseline understanding, this is one of my huge criticisms of the video essayists, okay, you guys, is when I listen to a person do a video and it's a 10-minute video or an hour video, whatever, sometimes I feel like that person knows 10 minutes worth of that topic or an hour's worth of that topic. Every single thought they had went into this. Whereas like if somebody is speaking who's very knowledgeable about a thing for 10 minutes, there's probably at least 10 hours that they could talk about just that topic, if not more, depending on what it is, right? Yeah.
I try and do that with my own videos. In the very beginning, it was very just, here's my video.
Sure.
But now I'm like, I need to be able to answer for every single sentence that's in here. If someone's like, why did you say this? Or where did it come from? I need to be able to say, here's why, here's where it came from. And I need to be able to answer questions. So if someone watches my video and they're like, why did this happen? I need to know more than what I put in the video.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Because one thing that people don't realize, and I hate it, so many people criticize Wikipedia and they don't know the good criticisms. And this is a thing that drives me insane. Okay.
I'm a Wikipedia warrior.
No, actually, I think you should read a lot of stuff, and other people will read Wikipedia more than I fucking do. But when I hear a certain criticism of Wikipedia, I'm like, you don't even know why it's a bad source. Here's the thing that I feel very strongly about. If you are sourcing compilation sources, sometimes people will say like, oh, well, if you're sourcing the wiki, we'll just click through to the things and like, go to that, read that, and then source that. I don't think that's good. If you're reading a Wikipedia and it's sourcing something else, you should just source the Wikipedia, because that tells me way more about what happened than if you source the underlying sources. Because what people don't realize is the editorial decisions of what you're even sourcing is arguably more important than whatever the fuck you're writing yourself. And I remember I got into an argument with a guy who gave me like 3 or 4 sources, and I was trying to figure out, and it had to do with like statements that a U.S. ambassador from Israel is making, Abba Ivan, I think, or Abba Ivan. It was statements that he was making, and I was trying to figure out, okay, where did you pull this sentence from? Because I don't understand what's. And then he gave me the source, which is one of his diaries about I think it was before the 6 Day War. He's gave me one of his diaries, and then I go up and I pull up the book and I download it on a Kindle and I read it. And I'm like, okay, what's coming before and after this? I don't really think this is like, this statement is meaning what you think it means. And he's like, okay, well, I got this source. And after doing this for about an hour, I realized you didn't pick any of these. These are the fucking footnotes from somebody else's book. Why didn't you just source me their argument? Because you didn't pick these sources. And that's very frustrating. That's one of the limits of Wikipedia. One of the biggest restraints of Wikipedia is you can't evaluate the importance of a source that comes from A or B. I could read a sentence that says, all white people are able to fly. And then the next sentence could say, white people also have laser vision. That first source could be from the most discredited author in all of human history. And the second source could be fucking God himself. But I have no way to evaluate the weight of either of those.
Right.
So yeah, so the editorial decision of what you're saying, like, why did you include that sentence is arguably more important than whatever fact itself you included, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I disagree with you on Wikipedia, apparently.
Oh, sure. What do you disagree about?
Well,
I think it has limitations as a source. I just don't think people understand why. And at this point, the media environment is so fucking degraded. If you read the Wikipedia, you already know more than 99.99% of whoever the fuck was arguing the topic anyway.
I think Wikipedia is fine if you want like general knowledge and just some sort of base understanding.
Starting point.
Yeah, a starting point. But, as I'm doing research, I'll look at this person's page and they'll say that they got married to so-and-so on this day. I'm like, oh, and I'll click on so-and-so. They got married with them on some different day. And like, even Wikipedia isn't consistent with itself. And so that part is very frustrating.
Yeah.
Especially, I was a teacher back in 2012, 2014, 2015. So Wikipedia was a thing, not ChatGPT, thank God. But the amount of times I would get, I would be able to tell exactly which article they copied it from because it's wrong in this specific way, right?
Yeah.
Now those are kids and they don't know yet that they shouldn't do that. But a lot of adults still do it. They still, here's the Wikipedia where it says that so-and-so, and like, what's the source? Oh, it's some book that isn't available online, which means the editor found it in some library, maybe, and put it in there, you know?
Man, and the worst thing is, after reading a lot of stuff now, and I hate it because it limits my ability to speak on a lot of topics because I just don't want to talk about a thing if I haven't read it, is I think it's really important to go through footnotes and annotations because my God, even like really seemingly well-renowned or well-sourced fucking Supreme Court decisions, and Roberts does this a lot, where there'll be a quotation. He did this a lot in the immunity case with Nixon v. Fitzgerald, but he'll cite a sentence, and what comes after it is incredibly important and is absent from the citation. And it's like, this would radically alter my understanding of the implication of this quote. And on Wikipedia, like you said, a lot of the times it's like, oh, this comes from, from Keller, page 127 through 129. Yeah. Well, thanks, motherfucker.
Yeah, thanks.
Like,
what's the title of this? Yeah.
Yeah, Jesus. Yeah. So that's very annoying that you can't evaluate the underlying material sometimes. Yeah.
When it comes to quotes, in my Seventh-day Adventist video, my Christian Science video, where there was a book that I was reading because it was highly recommended, and I started to notice like the little things, right? And one of them was that in a quote, there was a lot of ellipses. There was just a ton of ellipses, and I'm like, I want to know what's missing here.
What do we cut out here? It's a book. We're supposed to spend a lot of time reading this. You don't have a 47-minute fucking time limit. Why are you cutting so much out here? Like, I'm already bored enough to read a fucking history book. Include the goddamn quote, right? Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
And I included that part in the video where I was like, here, and so I looked it up, and what's missing? The most important thing ever. Like, it was a. So Mary Baker Eddy, the leader of Christian Science, the whole origin story is very similar to Scientology in that she was mortally wounded and she healed herself through the magic of prayer, and now here's a whole religion. But there was a letter she wrote like 2 weeks after her injury, where she wrote to a doctor, and in the book, where the ellipses were all of her saying like, I'm still deathly injured, I can't move, please help me, blah, blah. But this is supposedly after she healed herself, right? So the author like just erase that part to keep
Why
the
the
nice
quote? Why
Yeah.
just paraphrase her at that
Well,
point?
because then you read it and you're like, oh, okay.
There's quotes.
Yeah.
Oh, heuristic? That's actually a big red flag for me now, is I immediately assume somebody is full of shit when they say, I have 350 footnotes, I have 270 annotate. Anytime somebody brags about the number of sources that they have in a book, I'm always like, I don't know about that, because the two biggest authors I've seen do this are Irving would brag about this constantly, and Finkelstein brags about this a lot. And the source material is not utilized very well in either case. Yeah.
When I was thinking, you were talking about people don't like not knowing what you don't know.
Right.
I think a lot about when I was thinking about stages of learning, I always, when I'm coming across a new topic, I feel like where I start at is like one heuristic I use personally to tell if I should even engage in talking about a topic is if somebody says, what do you not know about X? And I don't have an answer, that means I'm like the baby when it comes to this. If you don't even know what you don't know, that's like a really big like warning flag. Is there any other warning flags, since you want to be about like knowing better, to cue you that you should be further advancing or more cautious in your assumptions about the topic?
Could you ask that again?
Yeah.
I need to hear the question again.
What are some flags that occur to you of going, I need to look into this more. I need to investigate this more?
Now, see, that's also like very situation dependent, right? Because there are points where I'll read something in a book and I'm like, well, hold on now, and I'll end up doing an hour of side research to try and figure out what that is. But I don't know that I can come up with any like specific examples, really.
One funny thing that happens with books is a similar thing to Wikipedia, where, do you know who J.J. McCullough is?
Yes, of course, we're friends.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. No, I'm just kidding. No, he's a cool guy. I love him. He brought up this I think he brought this up, or I've heard it before, and I was reminded of it in his video, that Wikipedia ends up being this repository of and the source for every single claim on the internet.
Yes.
That can happen for some historical stuff as well.
Yes.
Where
Yeah.
you see a certain statement that pops up over and again, it's like, oh, I know where this came from. For Ukraine and Russia, there's this concept that NATO promised not to move 1 inch eastward, and I know where this claim comes from. And it shows up in every single propaganda video. And it's like it was over Baker and the conversation over with Gorbachev and all this. And it's like, and sometimes there are those, like if you know the underlying material and you see like this one statement, you know where it comes from. But it's funny that wiki problem happens sometimes in books as well, where it's one source that comes up over and over and over again. Yeah.
Or, you know, you want to know about, you know, whatever, Hawaii, and you look it up and you see in the Google like little summary, it's like the same sentence over and over because they've all just been copy pasting from each other, you know?
Yeah.
Which topic that you've done so far has been difficult to research because of this, where like the sourcing isn't great, or even if you go to the books, you're like, oh boy, like we're all sourcing from the exact same thing, and I don't know if that's good. Has there been any topic that's been really difficult in that way?
I mean, Hawaii is turning out a little bit that way. There's one guy named Kuykendall who is like the ultimate source on everything, and he's back in the 1920s and 30s. So every book I've read cites him. So I was like, okay, I just need to read him then. You know? I think Christian Science was probably the most difficult to research because the information just isn't out there. Like they're a small group, so there aren't a lot of books about them or anything. So I guess when the more niche a topic is and the fewer books there are, it makes it more difficult. You would think that a lot of these, like Seventh-day Adventists was kind of the same way, in that there just aren't a lot of books talking about their history, either because they don't want that to be or what have you.
I'm surprised to hear that, actually, because I feel like maybe I have a biased perspective because Seventh-day Adventist is really big in like the city that I come from in Alberta. But I'm surprised to hear that there's just not a lot of books on the history of Seventh-day Adventism.
Yeah, there aren't.
As you go into a lot of these things, I'm more and more of these like little heuristics actually pop into my mind. It's just kind of funny as you bring these up. In terms of, sometimes people don't realize, maybe this has to do again with the fluidity of knowledge in an area, but people sometimes will make claims, they don't realize how strong the claim they're making is. Like there are some stories that on their face are immediately plausible, and there are some stories on their face that are immediately unbelievable. However, people will say the two like they're the same. Historical and a modern example. So like a historical example might be something along the lines of like, or no, actually, wait, these are both modern examples. A modern example might be something along the lines of like, somebody will say something like, in Israel, there's two claims, okay? In Israel, Palestine, this soldier shot this innocent civilian, and I think it's just because they wanted to kill this civilian. And that claim on its face is immediately that's not an unbelievable claim.
Correct.
That a soldier could do that action. There's bad people, there's a lot of bad blood, like that. I'm not immediately like, there's no way. But then somebody will say something like, there was an airstrike that was called on this building. I think they did this just to kill civilians. And when you understand kind of like the whole strike cell process, it's like, there's a lot of people involved that were signing off on this attack that was literally done just to murder civilians. Regardless of whether the claim is true or not, that claim is way more extreme than just the individual soldier. But people will cite them as though they're equally like, oh yeah, one could happen, then the other could.
Yeah.
For historical stuff or for conspiracy kind of stuff in the modern day, if somebody were to tell me something like, the head of the FBI made a phone call or the head of the FBI was trying to get a police department to arrest more black people because he wanted to be racist or whatever under Donald Trump. And somebody were to say, or it doesn't have to be Donald Trump, somebody would say like, I think this guy called the police chief or whatever, some claim like that. While that's a pretty fantastic claim, it's like, okay, you're implicating two people here, not unbelievable on its face. But when somebody will say something like this entire police department or the entire FBI or CIA is all involved in like staging attacks against Americans or whatever, in the modern day when everybody has cell phones and these are all like, it's like that's a way higher claim, right? Like the idea that one or two people in the CIA or somebody might have wanted to kill like a certain person is way different than like a whole bunch of people in the government caused 9/11. These are way different in strength. And a lot of people don't immediately see the difference there.
Yeah.
Oh no, my brain just completely flopped. Oh, I remember. Okay. A lot of your videos, what I've been finding interesting, especially the Kellogg's and the the vegetarian video, there's oftentimes like one or two men that are very central to the story, right? In the case of vegetarianism, it was Sylvester Graham, I think, was like a really important character in all this. Obviously, Kellogg is the central character of the Kellogg story. How do you, because this makes me, and I'll be very clear, I'm a bab on this theory. I don't know anything about this theory. I don't know what I don't know about this theory, but the great man theory constantly comes to mind when I hear these stories about like one individual changing everything. I even think about Musk and probably the level of impact that he had on the recent election, right? What do you think about the great man theory? Do you think that there's evidence for it? Why do you agree or disagree with it?
So I guess I don't discount the great man theory right off the bat. I do think there are some valid criticisms within it that like when, Churchill didn't win World War II, he didn't do it. It was the country, right? So in that case, like the great man theory doesn't really hold up for me. But when it comes to like who pioneered cereal, that can be one person, who invented graham crackers. Like obviously it's one guy. Well, I shouldn't say obviously, but like who popularized this theory or whatever. That can be one person. I don't see why you'd have to complicate that. But when it comes to large countries and political movements and stuff, that's where I think it gets a little shaky. There are certainly people you could point to like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, but then there are also all the people standing next to him whose names I don't know, I think it's very situation dependent. And like I said, when it comes to countries, I tend to discount it. But when it comes to ideas and products, I think one person is capable.
Why do you think it feels like so? Sylvester Graham, could you maybe just for the audience remind us like who he is, why he's relevant, and like what he did?
So he lived in the 1820s and 30s. Well, okay, he lived longer than that, but that's where
he was 10 years old.
But he was very concerned with lascivious thoughts and masturbating, and he thought that a very plain diet would stop those urges. Meat and exciting flavors, that excites you and makes you want to.
Why? Okay, sorry. Because Kellogg's was also obsessed with masturbation. Right. Why are there so many food people that are obsessed with masturbation?
They were directly.
Okay, it's incestuous ideas, essentially.
I guess I would call Kellogg like a son to Sylvester Graham.
Okay.
They weren't like the same age. They came one after each other, and there was like a little bit of overlap there. But yeah, he Sylvester specifically, like in his diaries, he talks about how embarrassed he is over his masturbation habit and all that. So he came up with this idea, and it caught on because that was like a big issue at the time. It's the beginning of temperance and all that. But then Kellogg came along in like 1870, and he took the idea and kind of ran with it. He wasn't as obsessed with the masturbation stuff. Like we all kind of laugh at cornflakes because they were invented to stop you from masturbating, which isn't true. They were invented as a dietary aid to make you poop 4 times a day. But also he believed that this plain cereal would also stop you from masturbating.
Is it because it improved your overall health and masturbation was like a symptom of ill health?
Yeah, masturbation was a degenerate activity, which, by the way, in that video, I learned what degeneracy actually meant. I always thought that it was like just some cultural, like going backwards culturally, I guess, maybe. Mm-hmm. But really what it is that they thought that as you masturbate, you're letting your life force out, so you will physically degenerate. Your body will break down and you'll become weak. And yeah, I was like, wow, really? That's where degeneracy comes from. Okay. Actual literal degeneracy.
Yeah. So. Was Sylvester Graham sickly himself?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, as a child, yeah.
And Kellogg was as well.
I don't know if he was.
Okay.
No, I don't think he was, because he was a medical doctor and stuff. So he was, that was his big thing. He had a sanitarium, this hospital that people would go to, and he invented cornflakes to feed the people at his hospital, not as a mass product. So
yeah. So one thing that I find really interesting when you look at these case studies of like Kellogg or Sylvester Graham is they not only revolutionized, for example, the food industry, mm-hmm. But they also come with so much additional baggage. So that they don't just change food; they're like a cultural phenom that affect everything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Metamucil. Activia, the yogurt, anything that's like fiber to keep you regular. There is no such thing as regular. You poop when you have to poop. That's just how it is. But Kellogg was like, you have to poop 4 times a day. So that's the definition of regular. There's that, the acidophilus probiotic stuff he did also.
Is that connected to like modern day probiotics? And is that like all part of the same thing?
Yeah. He came up with that to help people with their guts, and we still use it today. Yeah. My grandma, she was a nurse during World War II, and then a grandma. And whenever we'd go to visit her for Christmas, she would always ask, like, when was the last time you had a BM? When was the last time you had a bowel movement? Because nurses in the 40s and 50s were still taught Kellogg's ideas. And, those people are still alive. Well, a lot of them anyway are still alive. Mm-hmm. And so those ideas are still around. So.
Wait, is your grandma, she's not alive today?
She died last year, actually. So.
Wow. How old was she?
93.
And you're telling me this probiotic shit is bullshit? How many? She was pooping 4 times a day? Maybe. I don't know. She lived at 93.
I'm not saying it's bullshit. I'm saying that he started and it came about. What is BS is that you have to poop regularly. Like.
What do you mean by that?
You just poop when you have to poop.
What if you poop like once a month?
Then that's what your body decides.
Very unlikely though, right?
Okay. Is there, going through modern stuff, obviously we're on the age of misinformation. Mm-hmm. We've been here for like 8 years at least.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you have taken with you from your studying for YouTube videos that you think helps you parse news today, or like advice you would give to listeners when it comes to parsing news today? Or do you just totally go hands-off when it comes to modern politics?
Oh, no, I'm definitely very involved and hands-on. My therapist says I shouldn't be,
okay.
But I'm like, why are you telling me to be less informed? Mm-hmm. So anyway, yes, I'm very involved. And I mean, I'm just gonna say, like, when it comes from the right, I typically distrust it until I find it somewhere else. It they're prone to exaggeration. They're prone. I mean, they'll say stuff like, "Can you believe this senator is pro pedophilia because he didn't vote for some bill that increased penalty?" You know, like,
Yeah.
and I see that on Twitter all the time. People accusing, of being of being a pedo or being a rapist or whatever. And so I'm immediately skeptical of most claims like that. And when it comes to I watch the PBS NewsHour every day. It's like the one thing I make sure I do, because PBS is the least biased source. I would say they don't have ads or anything. And so I'll be on Twitter all day. I'll find out that some hospital was bombed, this happened or that happened. And then when the NewsHour comes on, I'll find out if it was true.
Sure.
And that's sort of how I go about it.
Do you think we're entering a unique era where some of this stuff might be irrecoverable?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Because there are a lot of people who don't watch, the news, or they just have Fox News on in the background or whatever. I struggle to see a way back from where we are now. And especially with ChatGPT and everything, I'm really concerned that it's going to get worse.
Even with younger generations, like the younger generations will continue to degenerate
absolutely.
in the other in the original way it was meant.
Yeah. I mean, I can't speak to future generations really, but I'm thinking in the next 10 years how much worse a lot of this will be, because a lot of news agencies are letting their people go and using AI to write their stuff now, which, is not good. I think it's going to sort of get worse until we reach a breaking point and we're like, no more of this nonsense.
You seem skeptical of AI and like its ability to parse information, particularly. Right. What's driving that skepticism? What's your concern?
I'm using it. I've used it and tried to. I've tried to do research. I don't believe anything it tells me, of course, but just asking it stuff that I know the answers to, just to see what it says. And a lot of people will say that it's not used for that, but that's what people do use it for.
Oh, for sure.
So that's you're not supposed to put Q-tips in your ears either, right? Like, people are going to do it anyway. I would look at it, ask it questions, I would correct it, and it would be like, yeah, of course, you're right. Sorry. It's not.
I was so fucking irritated. It shows up on all my goddamn Google searches, and I never trust any of the fucking AI summaries for anything.
Yeah. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
So I worry about the information part. I worry about people using it for research. I also worry about, people not developing their own skills and instead relying on this instead.
Yeah. What's interesting, because I'm pretty actually pro AI personally, but for not when people use it to ask it a question of fact, I'm very, very concerned. There's definitely better systems. I forget there's one AI system that all it does is it pulls from the internet and it cites sources. It'll give you an answer, an immediate citation, which is handy because then you can at least click through and see the citations.
I think that's Gemini, the Google one.
Yes, that is what it is. But recently I was trying to figure out, I had an interpersonal dispute, and I was trying to figure out how to go forward and what to do about it. And I was like, I need to talk to somebody about this, but the only person that I was around was the person I was mad at. Right. And I'm not going to talk to the person I'm mad at about why I'm mad at them. So I was like, I'm just going to try ChatGPT. Let's see if it has any ideas. And so I kind of outlined the whole situation, and it was exceptionally helpful at helping me organize all of my thoughts, all of the different threads about what was going on, so I could kind of read back my own thoughts and go oh, okay, so this is what I think about this and this and this, and that was really helpful. And I gave it a little bit more information, and I asked it as well. But part of what happened is I asked it, for example, I was if I'm having an error in my thinking pointed out, tell me if there's any inconsistencies or any contradictions, or if there's an area that I'm being blind to, which it actually did really well. At one point was do you think that you're feeling this because of this other thing that you mentioned 4 paragraphs up? And I was like, Shoot,
Ironically enough,
yes,
I think
I am.
the whole nice thing about, or the whole hard thing about AI was getting more generalized AIs that could kind of like problem solve. And ironically enough, I think that the harder thing, AI is actually decent at problem solving, but it's not good at like sourcing or understanding underlying material. So if I give it like like for a lot of programmers now who don't always know the syntax of the different frameworks they're working in or languages they're coding in or whatever, can ask like, hey, can you show me how I would do this in some language? ChatGPT can be very good at giving you that answer. Or if you tell it a bunch of problems, it'd be good at giving you something. But when you're asking for sources or information
to teach you.
Yeah,
It's not an educator.
It lacks a lot of the, or at least up to this point, it's still lacking a lot of the contextualization and just the knowledge of knowing what is a thing. Another way, heuristic. Another way that I can tell sometimes when people are understanding the material they're talking about is when you ask a person like, oh, like, how do you research this? And that answer is going to vary a lot. If somebody does a lot of, like medicine or biology, they'll probably be able to rattle off more than just even like Nature, Lancet, or the New England Journal. They might know a lot of journals I've never heard of before, right? But if nobody has an answer, like, oh, I'll just Google around and I'll read a lot of sources. That's always the answer that everybody. I Google and I read a lot of sources.
I use Wikipedia as a starting.
Yeah, and it's like if you have a fluidity in some field, you should probably know a couple landmark papers because there's usually a few big ones. You should probably know a couple of the dueling authors because there's usually at least two that are going back and forth right at each other, or a couple of or a few of the big historians, because in every single field it won't always be like this. There's never, when somebody's like, oh, like I don't know how I feel about X topic, there's a million papers. No, there's probably not. There's probably several really big ones. There's probably a few really big lit reviews or meta-analyses, and this is generally what people are going off of. There's never, or if there are like a million papers, the effect size difference between these are quite small. Nobody's writing a paper one day that says minimum wage will destroy the economy, and the next day saying minimum wage will be the salvation that takes us to glorious socialist country. Like that's not the case. Usually they're arguing on the ends of that.
Yeah. I mean, there's big concern among teachers that they're using it for homework. I'm not worried about that right now.
Really?
Every assignment I've seen that was AI, I could immediately tag it as AI. Like just the way it's written, and if you know your students, it's very easy. Like, you didn't write this. Like, you've never used this word before. Like,
so then, because I know a bunch of college students. I know both professors and college students, right? So I love hearing both of the sides. So I know a bunch of college students that are like, if you just use a basic AI, they'll always catch you. But if you train the bot on 5 of your previous papers and then use this specific bot in this way, and then you test it on this thing, the
why
AI
not just
can't be
do
caught.
the paper at that point?
Well, it's actually interesting because there's a part of me that's there's a part of me that's open to this. If it's like, if you have to go through that much work to get a bot to like write your prose for you, you're almost kind of engaging enough with the ideas that I might just give you a pass. You might have a different feeling about that.
I was a huge cheater in high school when I could, and I would go through a retarded amount of effort to cheat because I'd bring up for my AP English 3 class, my teacher didn't let us use Spark Notes, and the first 2, it would be like the daily like 10 question quizzes to make sure we're reading the material, and I got zeros on both of them, and I thought I kept reading the wrong Spark Notes. And then after the 3rd day in class, she's like, I noticed some of you are having a lot of trouble with this. If you're not reading the material, it's because you're not reading the material. And if you're reading the Spark Notes, because when I make my quizzes, I design them around the Spark Notes. And I was like, okay, bitch. Well, I'm going to read the Spark Notes and the Cliff Notes and the Spark Notes and Cliff Notes extended discussions. So fuck you. So by the end of this, I've got like 4 different sites basically where I'm reading this shit. And I think like halfway through the year, I'm like, fuck me, I'm just going to read Beowulf. Jesus, stupid, boring fucking book. Yeah, at some point, like the cheating just becomes, it's like so much effort. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess when I think about AI, I wonder how close it is to like the advent of the calculator for mathematics teachers, for example, where they're like, because there was a big pushback against using calculators for good reason. A lot of the reasons that they gave were
I was
sound.
actually going to use that example earlier when we were talking. I was going to say that, when the calculator came about, they were worried that now people won't know math because they'll just use the calculator, right?
Yeah.
And when the calculator was invented, everyone at that time knew math. They knew 4 + 4 is 8 and all that stuff. They knew that. And they get the calculator, and that's just a shortcut. They know how to do it, but this is shorter. When it comes to ChatGPT, they don't know how to do it yet. They're just asking the thing to do it, right? So they don't know whether the output is makes sense or is correct or anything like that. And so that's why it's
it's an apples to oranges situation.
For most of the papers anyway that I've seen, it's immediately obvious that it's AI. And especially if you know what grade level you're working with and stuff, it becomes even more apparent. Are there lazy teachers and college professors who will just read it and accept it and that's it? Yeah, and that's probably most of them. Yeah, and that's a bummer.
Yeah. Do you think college students could get away with it more than like a grade 10 student? Just because a college student you would expect to be writing at a higher level. So when a grade 10 student throws you this AI paper, you're like, bro, you don't know what half these words mean. Like, there's no way you wrote this.
Just to clarify here, whether you're a 10th grader or a college student, the only person you're cheating is yourself. Like the only person oh, wow, you got the grade. Great. But now you don't know the stuff, right? So I was very much that way in high school and even my first time through college. I just wanted the grade at the end. I was gifted in honors classes in high school. So the whole time I had this chip on my shoulder that like, I don't actually need to do this because I already know this stuff, right? So I was a B student in high school and college because I was like, I don't need this, or this is beneath me or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was my second time through college when I was 30 years old that I was like, I'm going to do everything. I'm going to read every assignment. I'm going to go to every study hall. I'm going to join whatever clubs and groups there are and all that. And the experience was so much better, not only socially, but like I was getting 4.0s every semester. And I'm like, college is wasted on 20-year-olds.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's another heuristic I'll often use when people are like, man, I was just so lucky. I think like the college that I went to was just really good. I'm like, I know that you were an engaged student.
Yeah.
Because every single time I hear this from somebody, and I used to always say the same thing, like, I'm just really lucky at the university that I went to. And I still to some degree feel that way. My mentor was incredible, but also I was an incredibly engaged student. And every other person that I hear say that, typically I'll look up their universities. Like, if you look at my university, like, it's one of the top undergraduate Canadian universities, but it's like, that's not, it's cool. It's not that impressive, right?
Sure.
And you hear that over and over, which I feel like is such a good sign that somebody is engaged. I also wanted to push you on this one. Okay. As a very engaged student, I hate writing papers.
Yeah.
I loathe it because this is the issue. And I realize that I'm not necessarily the student that all learning is geared for necessarily. I remember I wrote a paper on Capgras syndrome. Do you know what Capgras syndrome is?
I have a video on that one, yeah.
Oh, really? Do you want to tell us what Capgras syndrome is? Just because it's really cool.
Okay. Well, so it usually happens after some sort of injury or surgery or something like that, or stroke, where a part of your brain loses blood and dies. But what happens is you look at someone your dad, your sister, whatever, and they're your dad or your sister and that you're supposed to love them, but you don't feel anything when you look at them because the connection got severed somehow. So you look at them and you feel nothing, so you think they're fake. Like, this is a replacement person or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really cool because you can take people, like, they can call their mom while they're looking at their mom.
The voice, yeah.
And they'll be like, no, that's my mom, but that's not my mom. And you're like, bro, it's crazy, right? It's a really interesting brain condition, essentially, that shows you, like, anyway, if you're a neuroscience nerd, it's just really fascinating. And so I had to write this paper on it. And I remember I did all the research. I figured it all out, learned a whole bunch about Capgras syndrome and the centers that were associated and where the severance we believe probably is occurring and all this sort of stuff. And I was like, oh, now I have to put this into prose. Like, I had it all put out and I was like, I don't want to have to put like thes and all that stupid stuff. I remember being so mad. And so when I look back, I'm like, gosh, if I had like an AI system where it could be like, this is all the information you need to know. This is my thesis. This is my conclusion. Can you just write it for me? I would have loved that and I would have still absorbed it. Now, you may disagree, but like, I hated writing papers for this reason because I'd be like, I just spent like 30 hours researching this. I get it. I've written it all down in bullet form. I know this. You could grill me on it. I could do an oral presentation on this and I would love to do that. But now you're making me write it and I hate that. And I hate that I have to do it.
sucks. Do it anyway.
I agree. And I mean, I did, but
In life, like sometimes you have to write stuff. Sometimes you have to be there on time, and if you're not, you lose it. Like, and I see that sort of withering away. Even when I was a teacher, my school didn't have due dates. I would assign homework, and I wasn't allowed to do due dates. The only official due date was the end of the quarter. Like at
was
the end.
it a module school?
Nope, it was regular high school, but let's say it was a challenging high school.
Okay, yeah.
So no due dates. Just turn your work in, please, like that. And the only due date was the end of the quarter because that's when grades are due, right? So
Poor teachers. You guys must have been
yeah,
flooded.
I would get a huge stack. Yeah. I would get a huge stack. I'd put in my grade, and then the next day a kid would come, please, can you take this? And I'm like, no. No, because if I take yours, what about the 6 people who asked me earlier this morning that I told no to? You know, I'd have to go back and say yes to them. And then you won't learn that due dates matter. Like you had one due date and you just couldn't do it. Too bad, sucks. You know, now you have a C and you don't get to play volleyball. You know, that's just how it is. Like there have to be consequences, and I feel like those are sort of going away. Even when that situation I told you, the parent called me very angry. I stood firm, called the principal, called the superintendent, went up to the superintendent. I had an email from them saying, like, we support you in this. There is a due date. This is very clearly in the handbook, blah, blah. But I now know 10 years on that the parents are winning more of these battles.
Yes.
And so the kids, I mean, they're not writing the papers, and they don't care about due dates or, you know, that kind of stuff. I don't think it's very good.
It's also creating this weird imperative where in this way, you're actually having to maintain a boundary that fundamentally probably parents should be imposing on their children, right? And so increasingly we're like co-opting the school to be teaching these like societal skills that they need to have, right? If you have a job, you can't just like be like, sorry, next week, even though it's like, you know, there's this, I don't know if you've ever read Chris Voss, but he talks about like in negotiation, treat deadlines like they're negotiable, right? And I think that that's a really good negotiation skill specifically, right? Because you're more likely to land a business deal if you're flexible about them canceling on you and stuff like that. Obviously.
Negotiations, though, assume that both sides have leverage. You don't have leverage on your boss. Yeah.
Exactly, right? But the issue is that I think a lot of people will take that advice from like Chris Voss, because I hear people say it a lot and be like, so like, why does my boss care about like the due date of this? I'm like, probably because your boss has a due date from his boss, and his boss has a due date probably to stockholders or like to something else.
And the ship leaves tomorrow.
Yeah.
Like,
And it has to happen, right? And it's an interesting thing that's happened where people are increasingly frustrated with schools being parentified and increasingly shifting parentification onto schools regardless.
It's a very bizarre dichotomy there. Yeah.
How long did you teach for?
I was only a teacher for 4.5 years. Yeah.
And then did you start YouTube in that process, or what?
No. I started YouTube after. Okay. So I went to college. I got deployed to Iraq. I came back and I was a teacher for 4 or 5 years. Then I decided to use my GI Bill, and I got my second degree in psychology. And I was applying for grad schools and stuff, and my mentor professor told me I should start a blog to keep my skills sharp. And I was like, nobody reads blogs anymore.
That's a crazy professor. That's interesting. I don't think I've ever heard that.
So I started the YouTube channel, and that's how it happened. Yeah.
Cool. Wow. Well, your professor,
over
there talking about.
What are fun facts you've learned?
Fun facts?
Yeah,
I've
that was the
learned?
first. I gave you that two-part of the big historical things you think people are misunderstanding now that are impacting us. But what are like, we brought up the heavy night armor is one.
Smallpox.
Oh, you brought up one actually that's not true. Q-tips will not destroy your fucking ear or brain unless you're like really digging in there. But that's one where people are like, you can't use Q-tips in your ear canal, it'll kill you. And it's like, you have to go really far in to actually cause damage.
You have to like fall over. But they tell you not to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, like we were saying earlier with the smallpox blankets. Sorry for the audience.
Yeah, could you let the
for the
audience know?
So, I was talking about how I'm researching Hawaii right now. And I previously did a video on Native Americans, and a lot of people will take the stuff they know about Native Americans and apply it to the Native Hawaiians. I already said that they abolished their own religion, so it wasn't like missionaries forcing them or anything. But one of the sort of Native American myths is the smallpox blankets. And there are one or two recorded instances of people trying to use smallpox blankets to get rid of the Indians. However, smallpox doesn't survive outside of the body for very long, so it's unlikely that smallpox blankets actually worked, but they did try. So
Was it rampant trying? Because you said there's one or two accounts. Does it sound like from the reading of the history?
I'm willing to bet there were more examples that just weren't recorded.
Yeah.
But the fact remains that it's also very unlikely to actually work.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Do you think there was a widespread within the colonies of like, we want to sell these smallpox blankets to try to
They
spread
weren't selling; they were giving them away.
giving them
right?
away?
Yeah,
Sorry, yeah.
I feel like it was a policy or widespread thing. I think there'd be more documented evidence of it, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just some nefarious actors, and probably they talked about it a
It
little
was
bit.
usually like, we need to get rid of this camp, or get them out of this fort, and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that wasn't a very fun fact. That was
Right.
kind of dark. Give something funner.
She's a fun fact.
Oh, man.
History is dark. I feel like a lot of history is dark.
This is such like a weird, like, putting me on the spot question. It's like, oh, say something in French.
Yeah, this is literally like when somebody says, I'm a comedian, and we go, tell a joke.
Yeah.
Tell a joke right now. Make me laugh.
A fun fact.
Okay, fuck. Well,
What's your favorite era of history to look
Favorite
at?
era of history. My favorite era, I think, is probably the 1800s.
In globally, is there specific countries that you're most interested in?
I mean, I know most about America, right? So yeah, it's definitely the 1800s. Probably even like the late post Civil War 1800s is like my favorite, because that's when Thanksgiving became a holiday, Christmas became a holiday. There's your fun fact for you. I mean, I
Okay.
guess if you didn't know that,
Didn't know that.
that the Pilgrims made Christmas illegal. It was an evil Catholic tradition that they didn't want. So it wasn't a holiday in America until 1881 or something, when the Irish and Catholics were coming.
Okay. Oh, American fun fact, I think. Paul Revere, when he was writing, probably didn't say the British are coming
Right.
because the colonists would have still seen themselves as British, basically.
Okay.
Or
Well,
they
I
were-
didn't think of that aspect of it, but yeah. Okay. Yeah. Paul
Wow.
Revere.
Maybe that's not true. Maybe he did write that.
Paul Revere was one of like 3 or 4 writers, but he's famous because of the poem. That's
Did he write the poem? I don't know
no.
much
Someone
about
else
this
wrote
history.
the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. Yeah.
Okay. I wonder why they picked him.
I rhymed, I think.
Probably. Okay, 1800s America. Trying to think. Ooh, do you read fiction much at all? Do you read 1800
No,
based
definitely
fiction?
not that. No.
Oh, okay, that's too bad.
I generally try to stay away from historical fiction just because I don't want to like accidentally have some idea put in my head. That's also in my research period. I don't watch anybody else's YouTube videos on that topic because I don't want to accidentally borrow their phrasing, and I don't want to accidentally pick up a lie or something they got wrong. So I typically don't watch their stuff. So after the fact, when a video goes up and people are like, oh, did you see Illuminati's video on this? I'm like, no. Specifically, I don't look at anybody else's.
Especially because sometimes there's like a lot of incestuous videos made
Yes.
about, I think the worst, what do you think is the worst community online for this? Did anything immediately come to mind? Or I think it's I love them and it's entertaining content, but I think the true crime community.
Oh,
I feel like there's like 7 cases that every single true crime, everybody's talked about like Jodi Arias and the fucking, there's like 5 or 6 different like killers that like every single person has made like a video on, like running through their trial and stuff. So yeah. And I'm sure for history, there's a lot of like, everybody's going to make a video on this thing. And it's, did the USA know that Japan was going to surrender before World War II? And like all of these things. Yeah.
I mean, when I try and think of what the big ones are, it's always like the Civil Rights Act, what happened there? And it's not Black Flight. What is it called? When all the Black people left the South and moved to like Milwaukee and Chicago and...
The The Underground Railroad. I'm just kidding. I'm
No,
sorry.
it's the Great Migration. I think it's the Great Migration.
Okay.
But like every history YouTuber kind of talks about
It is.
those.
Yeah, you're right.
Yes.
You win.
Good job.
Yeah, there's definitely some things that every YouTuber touches on, and a lot of them will do it independently, though. So it's not necessarily incestuous where they watch someone else's and they just
do
sort
their
of
own research,
regurgitate. Yeah. So at least in the history community, I don't think too many people are cutthroat like that, where they would steal someone else's kind of idea.
Has there ever been a learning of a certain historical thing that recontextualized the event a lot, where you're like, oh, I never would have considered looking at something like that? One thing that I'd never really considered is I thought that in World War II, in my mind, the U.S. and Japan were fighting and like people were dying and maybe we were like shooting bombs at each other, and then like the nukes came. It was like, whoa. And I'd never really contextualized the nukes.
island hopping?
Well, I never contextualized the nukes in the context of all the Japanese cities got bombed like an insanely fucking huge amount, and that like the firebombing of Tokyo killed more individual than either
Right.
bomb.
Yeah. Both the bombs put together, actually.
Yeah. And so the idea that when the nuclear bombs dropped, like that was definitely horrifying, but like retrospectively, the nuclear bombs are more horrifying than they probably even were at the time, because at the time there were entire cities that were being firebombed and destroyed and like burned to the ground within a day. So that would be like an example, I guess.
Here's a fun fact for you.
Is this gonna be really dark again?
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah,
It's
probably.
history. It's history. Of course it's going to be dark.
Before we dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we dropped
Pamphlets?
pamphlets telling them, we're going to drop a bomb on you, leave. And they didn't believe it because, of course, like a bomb, sure, whatever, and like you said, Tokyo was burnt to the ground. Like cities were just being burnt to the ground kind of all over, which I guess it kind of annoys me when people point to the atomic bombs as these uniquely horrible things, when they were just like one of hundreds of cities, Were they bad? Yes. Were they uniquely more terrible than Tokyo? I don't think so. No.
Yeah. I was gonna say that expression, carpet bombing. People will use it today, carpet bombing. It's like this. Bro.
You have no idea what carpet bombing.
You should see like the videos of the old planes. It's like
they just open the back and let everything fall out.
It's insane. Yeah.
What do you feel like if you were trying to understand the current? Ooh, okay. I'm going to give you the worst question ever. Okay,
Sure.
You're going to hate me.
Yeah, let's go.
If you want to understand the current political climate, what do you think is one of the most important historical events or eras to understand to help you understand what's going on right now?
Yeah, Nixon and Reagan, I think, are the most important.
You had that quick.
Yeah, as soon as you said it, yeah.
Why?
Because that set the stage for everything that we're seeing now. And Donald Trump takes a lot of his cues from that. I mean, he calls Mar-a-Lago the Southern White House. Nixon also had a Southern White House. Like it was very controversial when he did too, because it's weird. So for Trump to also do the same thing is bizarre. Trump is also a celebrity like Reagan was. There's just a lot of parallels.
Charisma like Reagan.
I mean, sure. I don't find him particularly charismatic, but
when I say charismatic, I mean there's a certain
influential.
There's a certain performative gravitas to have like your ear just shot and you think the cameras and you put your fist in the air. Like that's a very unique type of.
I will qualify that story. It was like a minute and a half before he got out. It was after the Secret Service cleared everything. This story gets told in the most irritating fucking way, and everybody does it.
It does look like it happened immediately.
No, it's because you've seen edited fucking clips of this. I hate when people talk. So the idea is the shot comes
Still
by,
good
Trump's on the
performance.
ground, and then he gets up and he's like, "Ah!" That's not what happened. The bullet whizzes by, he goes down, the Secret Service comes up, and there's about a minute of them like, shoot her down, all clear, all good. They all start to stand up, and Trump's like, give me my shoes, give me my shoes. And after about like 5 or 10 seconds, he got his shoes. Then he's like, wait. And then he does this thing. I think the performativity of that is much less like in the heat of. I encourage everybody.
Unedited version out there?
Yes, if you YouTube like Trump assassination attempt and watch the full like 2.5 minute video, it significantly changes. Now, not to say whether you thought it was cool he did or not. There's like the story. I hate it because I know in 20 years there's going to be so much of this that's retold.
It's gonna be
that he
the
jumped
mythos.
up in 10 or 15 seconds. And also, I will fight on because people say, oh, well, Trump is charismatic like Reagan. Everybody to some extent liked Reagan. This was a person whose popularity transcended party a lot. Donald Trump's popularity in this country has never surpassed, I think, 47 points. No.
Right.
He is charismatic with Republicans. Everybody in the left fucking hates him. Obama was a charismatic president because there were a decent number of conservatives, even if there were the talk radio guys, and the decent number of conservatives like, okay, yeah, okay, fine. Obama,
he's
right?
not the worst,
Trump has never crossed and will never cross, unless they manage to deport enough people or kill enough people in the U.S. to make it that way, will never cross that 50% threshold in terms of popularity. So he's not charismatic. He's a fucking loser. Sorry, I hate Trump.
I somewhat disagree, obviously. I hear what you're saying.
I agree that he's very persuasive and influential.
He's very good at knowing his base. But yeah, I didn't know that Reagan had a much higher popularity. So
when Reagan won that,
he had 49 states.
Yeah, they talk about an electoral college landslide. Reagan fucking annihilated. It was, what was the one holdout? Minnesota. Yeah.
What was Reagan doing that made both sides love him so much?
Well, okay, it's a reaction to the whole situation. So Nixon, was forced to resign over Watergate and all that, and Ford took over. But the Republicans lost the next election because obviously, like, they just had this corrupt president. So they put in Jimmy Carter, and he's pretty universally seen as a weakling now.
My mom and other Cubans I've heard refer to him as "turn the other cheek Carter." Is
really?
What my mom would call
I
him.
feel like everything I hear about him as a Canadian is that he's like this beloved humanitarian.
His post-presidency is amazing. It's the best post-presidency of anybody.
Carter is probably the reason, and there are a lot of Israeli diplomats. He's probably the reason why Israel was able to negotiate peace with Egypt. He facilitated a lot of that.
Yeah.
Carter,
okay.
Yeah, which, when they protested his wife's funeral, it's like, why? Like, of all the people to protest, why would you protest, like, the nicest? Anyway.
Can I ask a question about, so from Carter to Reagan, when Carter Reagan, right?
Yes.
Do you think that there was an event, okay, the Iranian hostage crisis?
Yes.
Do you think there was anything bad there? There's an accusation that,
yes.
Okay. Reagan came into office, and the second that he came into office, all of the hostages were released.
Yes.
Now, my mom tells that story. It's like, they knew that Carter was a weak man who wouldn't do anything. But when the Republican came in, when Reagan came in.
I hate that.
Yeah.
That's American military power was not existent under Carter. And then when Reagan was there, suddenly the military got really effective again.
So Reagan was working with the Iranians and told them to keep them
What level of conviction do you feel like really strongly about this? I haven't dug into this also.
I would say 85%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like he was colluding with Iranians for his own political gain to say, when I get office.
Yes, very much like what Trump does now with with
everybody foreign now.
Pledge to me now, and then once I become president, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
We just don't, the Logan Act, is that just like a meme, I guess? Or do we never care about that? Or
the Logan Act.
Logan Act was it's supposed to say that if you're you can't have improper contact with
Right, yes, that's right.
Foreign
if you're
officials,
not, yeah.
So what
I'm
he did
wondering
was
what the deal is with that too. Like, if you're not an elected official, you can't be speaking on behalf of the government.
Yeah.
And yet Trump does it all the time.
But I think we just stopped, for Trump, we just stopped caring about laws.
Was the Logan Act, did it exist when Reagan made that deal with
I think
Iran?
it's been around for a long time.
Well, back then it's different though, because back then they knew they were committing crimes. Like Iran-Contra, these were like things that they tried to cover up. Trump doesn't try to cover up any of the crime. He just does it in the open and nobody gives a fuck.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Like Watergate, there was was it Black Friday where Nixon was going to fire... Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
He was going to fire like half the fucking DOJ or something.
It was like Bloody Sunday or
maybe it was
something.
Bloody Sunday where he started fighting. They like back then when you committed crimes, you knew they were crimes, you tried to cover them up. But now there's just
with mass firings and everything. Yeah.
It's basically, it's the old adage of the, like if you like are dressed nicely, it's like a white dude and you just kind of like walk anywhere and you just like look like you have purpose. You just like go anywhere and no one's gonna like stop you. That's basically Trump is like, if I just commit a crime, I say, I can do that. Yeah. Fuck, do you ever watch Dave Chappelle?
Yeah.
Do you remember the story that he tells where he's with his friend Chip, who's high and he's driving and he gets caught?
I didn't know I could do that.
Yeah, I didn't know I couldn't do that. And Dave's like, I didn't know that would work. And then Chip looks over and he's like, I did know that I couldn't do that. And I was like, Jesus God. Sorry.
Going back, we didn't finish answering the question, why was Reagan so popular across party lines?
I mean, why was he popular? Well, because he was a movie actor. This situation had never happened before where an actor wanted to be a president. And he was very charismatic. And yes, people viewed Carter as a weakling. So when it came time for the next president, Reagan destroyed him. It wasn't even a challenge, really.
Was he handsome as well?
Reagan? I mean, I guess people say so, yeah.
Okay, yeah,
And
I'm just
also,
wondering.
that wasn't the first time he ran for office. He had been running for president. He ran against Nixon even in a primary. So he had been trying for a while. He was a known figure at that point. So, and he was the governor of California. Like, people knew who he was. So.
Okay, so he had more established.
But there's a book, Nixon Land, that kind of covers this. And the guy who wrote Nixon Land wrote a trilogy of Nixon, Reagan, and the in-between. And I think those are very good books. Or also When the Clock Broke. That's a newer one that came out that talks about actually the 80s to 90s transition of the neocons and such. And I feel like that's important to understand, especially for the Zoomers and the Gen Alphas.
What needs to be understood about that?
How much we should miss them. I miss the neocons.
Well, just like how the situation we're currently in was being set up. You mentioned earlier, I think it was you, that now that you're older, you're starting to hear stories of younger people telling like what happened. Like I watched a Zoomer video about the Iraq War.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah,
Oh,
and I was
no.
like, I was alive for this.
My version of this was watching a TikTok of a girl saying 20 years ago people could work minimum wage jobs and afford two-bedroom apartments. I was like, wait, hold on. I'm 35. I work for $5.15 an hour at McDonald's. That's fucking bullshit.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
Omaha, Nebraska, I couldn't afford an apartment on my own. I always said a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
The digging back through, I say historical, recent history, I have become so upset in reading about like the Ken Starr investigation for Bill Clinton, the Gore, the travesty of the Gore election essentially being stolen.
Yeah.
There was this weird thing that happened where in 2020 to like 2022, I kind of was like over the Trump hate, and I'm like, I feel like the liberals have kind of like gotten out of pocket with the whole Russiagate stuff. They've exaggerated a lot. I was like, I don't know. At first I thought it was really bad. I was like, I don't think it is. And then now as I've kind of like gone back through and it's like, okay, what was all this shit? And it's like, wait, Bannon's indictment said what? Or, Roger Stone was working with the Guccifer guy and he got totally pardoned by Trump. Like, and then I go back and I look, it's like, wait, this stuff was so much worse than even at the time I thought it was. Even when I thought like they were over exaggerating. And digging through, Republicans are just bad hombres. Not the best over the past several decades.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Not good.
I read a book about the beginning of the Iraq War because I was curious. I was there, right? So I want to know. And hearing the back and forth between like the U.S. State Department and Saddam Hussein and everything, it's like this invasion was
Like,
inevitable.
Yeah.
As much as we sit here and we're like, we went under false pretenses. Like,
Wait, because of the refusal to adhere to...
Yes,
Okay.
the inspectors and
They're
all that.
to adhere to what, sorry? Just to finish
The weapons inspectors. So Saddam Hussein 100% verified used chemical weapons on his own people. So he had them, right? And at some point during the 90s, he secretly got rid of them. This actually happened. He did secretly get rid of them, but
The chemical
he wanted people to still think he had them for the deterrent. So he kept playing that he has them and he wouldn't let inspectors come in because they would say that he doesn't have them. So he kept playing this game of chicken until he lost. And that's what happened.
So then that leads me to a really interesting question. You were there, you've also researched it now, and we talk about it a fair bit, how a lot of people look back at Iraq with high levels of regret, right?
Yes.
How do you view Iraq then, post however many years it's been since you've been there?
So I went in 2009. So at that point we had been pretty established. And I felt at that point that we had already overstayed our welcome. Yes, America went to war under false pretenses and Colin Powell 100% lied. If I were given the choice at the time, I would have preferred to go to Afghanistan than Iraq. I believed in Afghanistan more than I did Iraq, even at the time. But that's where they sent me. You don't get to choose, right? And while I was over there, that's when everything started to break down for me. All high school, college, everything, I was totally patriot, America all the way. I had an American flag over my dorm room bed, like I was all in. But it was while I was over there that I started to notice just little things, like how the truck driver I'm protecting gets paid 3 times more than I do. And I'm the base that I'm guarding is a Halliburton fuel stop. And just stuff like that where I was like, what am I doing here? I feel like I'm just cheap security for Halliburton. And I just sort of, I'm there, I can't do anything about it. So I just sort of just went through the rest of it, right? And then years later, I learned about this guy named Smedley Butler. I made a video about him also, just because I was like this. Yeah.
That's his first name?
Smedley.
That is rough.
Yeah.
That's a rough first name.
That's the 1800s, right? But he's this Marine general who was in the Spanish-American War, World War I, a ton of wars that you've never heard of in like Guatemala.
I've heard of World War One. But go ahead.
Good.
But he's just in all of these wars. And at the end of it, he started speaking out against the military-industrial complex. He wrote a book called War is a Racket, where he says that he was just a gangster for capitalism. And when I read that, I was like, oh my God, like this guy gets it. He's saying, he put into words what I was already feeling.
That's me.
Yeah.
I hate the Iraq War. Hot take, I know. I feel like the United States can engage in noble military action overseas, and I think that there are examples of that. And I think that the Iraq War poisoned us, like our brain and our appetite for any type of foreign interference whatsoever. Yeah. And I look at the modern, like if there was ever a time where the full brunt of America's military production could be brought, I don't care if Halliburton or Raytheon or Boeing or whoever the fuck making money off it, but if it could have been brought to bear for Ukraine, I think that would have been like but because we're so, I call it Iraq pill, like everybody's politics today, all foreign policy that people argue about the US always goes back to Iraq in like 3 sentences.
Okay, question though, with how big of the fuck up it was, is that caution and that like guilt essentially warranted and a good and a good counteraction to essentially what enabled all of the Iraq war to occur in the first place? Do you get what I'm asking?
Yeah, and the answer is no, because I think the problem is that I have the same problem with BLM, the same problem with this Luigi shooting, the same problem with Occupy Wall Street, is people will be angry, but they don't sit back and figure out like, well, what was the problem? And so we don't actually solve the problem. We just think that all of like America bad. Like in my opinion, and you're probably more well read on this, but in my opinion, like some of the bad things for the Iraq war, you said earlier, if the truth is on your side, why would you tell a lie? Yeah. Right? Saddam Hussein was a really bad guy. Yeah. I can understand. I think we didn't kick him out after 91. The Soviet Union just fell. It'd probably look bad if we're like doing regime change right after the fall. It's like, okay, fine, sure, he stays. Saddam Hussein was not a good person.
Right, yeah. He should have been taken out.
Yeah, invasion of Kuwait was horrible. Gassing the Kurdish people was fucking horrible. It's just a horrible fucking regime. And I'm sure you've seen the video of him when he becomes, I don't know if it's when he becomes president, and he starts like calling out names and having people taken away, and the people in the, I don't know if it's the parliament or whatever, the political body like start standing up and they're like, long live Saddam Hussein, and they're all like screaming because they know that. No. Yeah, it's just, this is an insane person. But then why this Office of Special Plans? Why the lying about weapons of mass destruction? Like, just say they're not coordinating with investigators. Like, be honest about it. Yeah, and that is a big problem, the lying, obviously. And the second issue, I think, is I think everybody says is mission creep. What the fuck is our job? What are we doing? Because it can't be undefined. Yeah. Like, you have to have like a clear mission. Like, what are we trying to do? And once we've done it, let's leave. Instead of it this being this like decades and decades of
Well, it's our generation's Vietnam. Really, in that it was just this endless war with no clear
defined end, or even a clear enemy, which is another frustrating thing about the Middle East, especially when people talk about Syria. People will say something like, oh, these guys are the bad guys because Al-Qaeda's with them. And it's like, bro, there's like 25 different groups at any point in time on either side of this conflict. Like, So, but like Ukraine is like, this is a defensive war against an invading enemy. It's obvious what the territorial integrity should be. We know the borders. We know the leaders. This is a very simple, this is not hard. This is in Iraq. This is a very simple thing. So it's frustrating.
Yeah, but it's because of Iraq and Vietnam and to a certain extent Afghanistan that we're timid to do any of that stuff. Yeah.
Do you have any anything else we should cover? Any important points?
Yeah, I'm just checking the time. I guess 2 questions for you.
Sure.
Number 1, what is like a book or an idea that you've read or come across in the last year that has been like a paradigm shift for you, where it's really changed how you thought about life, yourself, others?
Ooh. One book.
One book or an idea.
Or an idea. Okay. I guess the religion videos. The more I learn about the religions that we typically refer to as cults, like Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses or Seventh-day Adventists even, the more I learn about those, the less able I am to sympathize with religious people today.
Jesus.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was a big paradigm shift in learning how these religions were set up. Year by year, like they used to believe this, then they changed it to this because some law was passed. But once it was repealed, they changed it back. Like, okay, was that really a convicted belief that you had? Like stuff like that. Seeing the evolution of it, seeing the way the religion talks about itself now, where they ignore the past and that kind of stuff. I'm like, if I know that this happened for the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Seventh-day Adventists, it had to have happened for Christianity and Judaism and the others. And so it has really shaken a lot of my, things I thought I knew, in that, how can I say that this person is clearly lying and is a fraud? But this one 2,000 years ago, where I don't have what happened every day, is perhaps more reliable. And that's, I mean, it's shifted how I interact with people sometimes. When, yeah, it just sort of in general, I feel like we are in right now another great awakening, and a lot of these sort of groups that are forming are following a very similar pattern. QAnon it follows the other the cults that I've made videos on very like step by step.
Is QAnon religious as well, like a Christian religion thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a doomsday cult, really, in that they think Trump was appointed by God to come and clear away, the
They're probably very Revelations believers. As well. Okay.
Yeah. They would decode QAnon's posts in the same way that people nowadays decode the Bible to try and figure out when the end is going to happen, And so seeing these parallels, I'm like, this had to have happened previously and will continue to happen. As much as I wish, we've reached the end of history or that history repeats and will somehow come back to some normal, I don't think so. I think it's going to keep going in the way it is. And there will still be new religious movements coming about. When the Seventh-day Adventists started in the aftermath of the Great Disappointment, there were only 20 of them. So think of a church right now that only has 20 people, and imagine 100 years from now that it could have millions. You probably don't even know the name of that church yet because it's just some small Idaho thing. And so that really has changed my historical perspective and how I deal with people. But my historical perspective on the future, like seeing this is how it happened, this is what's happening, so this is what's probably going to happen, right? That was a big one, and then the racial stuff is also another big one.
The what stuff?
The racial stuff. I obviously
I think so the racial stuff.
No,
the racial stuff. Okay.
The neo-slavery.
The racial stuff. Yeah, I mean. Dang it, I had something in my head before you said that and now it's gone. Okay, yeah. I wasn't digging for racial stuff. I wasn't digging for proof that America is a racist country or anything. But I wanted to make a video on the post office And while learning about the post office, I learned that black people weren't allowed to carry the mail because if they had control of communications, they would overthrow America and we'd be under a black republic. Or I'm learning about banking, and that's when I learned about redlining and how credit scores work and how a white person with this much income gets this credit score and a black person with the same income gets this credit score. And I'm like, there's no other conclusion you could come to other than that it's a race thing. When it comes to the post office, banking, I made a whole bunch of videos that summer that were all like, I didn't think this was going to be racist, but here it is anyway. And so while I don't think America is a racist country in that sense, it's definitely full of a lot of racists, and we definitely had a lot of racist policies in the past, overt racist policies in the past, whereas nowadays it's more covert, if anything. Yeah.
Well, L for racism. L for racism is in the chat.
Thanks for wrapping that up really succinctly. It's a good TLDR.
Thank you.
Racism L, not good. Where can people find you? What should they be looking out for? It sounds like you got a new video up and coming.
My channel is Knowing Better on YouTube. I'm currently working on a video on Hawaii. That's going to be a somewhat spiritual successor to neo-slavery and Indian removal. I've been working on that for a few months now. I'm hoping that'll come out in March. We'll see. And I'm on Twitter, even though I wish I wasn't so much anymore. I'm also on Blue Sky and Mastodon, Instagram, all that. But for the most part, I'm on YouTube and I'm on Twitch. I'll stream on Twitch Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays. So
cool. What do you stream?
Well, nowadays it's me doing my work. So you can actually see me doing the research or see me writing, see me filming even. So, yeah.
That's really cool. Smart.
Cool. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for making your videos. Like I said, I'm not blowing smoke or anything. Like I genuinely started watching your videos and I was like, I should just invite this person. Like, I've been doing this arc where I'm like, wait, I should just invite people that I organically watch their content and really like. So yeah, thank you just for the work that you do. I really, it's actually interesting. I'm a decent, people would know who watch the show. I'm actually a religious person and I love all of your religion videos a lot. And I don't know if there's a religious video you can make that I wouldn't be like, yes, true. But yeah, I love them.
I should clarify. My goal is not to take away anyone's faith or dissuade anybody from being.
Mine is.
Right. Oh,
His
is
is.
it? Okay, well then there's that.
Sorry, anti-religion.
After I made the Jehovah's Witness video, actually a bunch of Jehovah's Witnesses came to me to tell me that their video or my video woke them up. And I wasn't as proud of that as you would think. I was like, oh, I don't want that responsibility. I don't want to be the guy who convinced you that God doesn't exist. You know, that's not what I want.
Yeah.
But, you know, it happens, I guess, and it's somewhat unavoidable. And I was also told that they probably were already on their way out anyway. So there's a little bit of solace there. But my goal is not like, I'm going to trash this religion and destroy it or whatever.
Yeah.
I want to know about it. You
Yeah.
know, I had friends who were Jehovah's Witnesses growing up. They never told me what they believed. So now I know, you know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see if you'll ever do, I think, evangelical Protestantism
huge topic,
specifically.
yeah.
It's huge and it's so politically relevant. And do you know much about the sedevacantvists?
No.
It's a Catholic. Okay, you'd
It's a
find
one-shot kill Harry Potter spell.
It is. It is.
wouldn't know
Yeah.
about it. It wasn't in the 7 books.
Careful how you say it. Truly, like somebody across the globe probably just died. It's a sect of Catholicism that has rejected the current pope, and I think, depending on the view, almost the last 10 sitting popes.
Okay.
They're very politically involved, particularly in like kind of the alt-right political domain. I got really like obsessed with them when I was looking into life starts at conception bills that were kind of popping up all over the states, like really, or I'm like, this is a crazy bill. And all of them were being spearheaded dominantly by either like kind of Christian nationalists, but a lot of them were sedevacantivists. And it's a very interesting little sect. I'd be so curious the video that you make on them.
I could
if
look
you
into
if you
that.
did.
Yeah. I mean, so like I went through my edgy teenage atheist phase, luckily before the internet was a thing. If the internet as it exists today was around when I was a kid, I would probably be a Sargon fan. Like I'm like mortified thinking about that.
The four horsemen of the atheist apocalypse.
Yeah. But I went through my teenage atheist phase, and then I sort of grew out of it. And I was just like, live and let live. I don't really care, blah, blah. But then in the last like 5 years, with QAnon and that kind of stuff, I'm like, I kind of think like the religion stuff needs to be toned back a little bit.
Religion and politics being together, not good. Very scary stuff comes out of it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to be that edgy teenage atheist again because it's insufferable. But there's definitely some creep going on there and that I would like to see halted.
Yeah, I agree. Cool.
And to clarify, I'm sweating because the AC is broken, not because I'm nervous.
And because you insulted me and my religion.
Sitting here like, oh my gosh, I probably look so terrible.
You don't. You look good. Okay. Cool. Should I do, shout outs. So we have a Patreon, guys. If you enjoy the content that we do, we have a whole bunch of new benefits that I'm sure you guys have been made aware of. And if you haven't, we've got 3 new tiers. The first tier gives you access to all the behind the scenes. So after this episode, Steve and I will sit down and kind of talk about what we thought about the episode. You can get that there, as well as early access and release to all of these episodes. The second tier allows you access to our unique Discord. Just started this month, but we're hoping to have basically AMAs with guests who can't fly out. Steve and I will interview them, and then you guys can actually come on and ask them questions yourselves. And the third level is team member. That allows you to join us kind of behind the scenes when we have staff meetings and whatnot. You can tune in, give your ideas, give your opinions. Join the Patreon if you enjoy what we do.
Cool.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Salud.
As soon as I said the religion thing, I was like, oh no, I just walked into that. And now I have to commit.
If it makes most of our viewers, I think, are pretty staunch atheists, so they're going to be like championing you.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. If anything, they're going to be like, oh, I hate when she brings up that she's religious. It's like her one boon. Bane.
The news is divided. Ground News puts it back together, so you can see how many sources are reporting on any breaking story, where they fall on the political spectrum, how reliable they are, and who owns them. Compare headlines and read full articles to see which details are prioritized, exaggerated, or left out entirely. Because the more we understand the media, the more we'll understand each other. Visit ground.news to learn more.